Good morning. Welcome to the SFCAHT conference on It's Everybody's Business, our anti-human trafficking symposium on the prevention and protection of our youth. I'm Katie Koifman. I'm delighted to be your MC today. I serve as the Director of Operations at PARCA, where we help individuals with developmental disabilities thrive in community. I got involved with SFCAHT as a volunteer for the National Council of Jewish Women in San Francisco. Like many of you, we're here with other organizations, and that's what makes this so great. We hope you're staying healthy and safe, and we're grateful we can be virtually together for this 9th convening of the conference. SFCAHT has also hosted conferences on healing and coping during crisis, sex trafficking, labor trafficking, best practices for practitioners, the economics, impacted industries, collaborative solutions, survivor protection. And this year, we're focusing aptly on youth trafficking and strategies for prevention and protection. So thank you for taking the time to join us as we build, lean into, share our knowledge, skills, strategies, leadership, our collective power to address youth trafficking. We have a robust group of folks today, over 120 of us here from all different backgrounds. I know we have volunteers, survivors, leaders in healthcare, law enforcement, justice, business, service providers, and many others. And that's what makes this collaborative so effective. It's a resilient, multifaceted network. We'd love to see who's in the virtual room today, so please find the chat feature at the bottom of your screen, and feel free to drop your name, your organization, maybe how you got involved with SFCAHT. This is a space for learning, engagement, and query, and we're really grateful for the time and energy you're investing in this work today and being here with us, being present. While you're starting to drop those introductions in the chat, I'll go through some housekeeping. Today's meeting will be recorded, and we ask that you stay on mute to keep this running smoothly. Since we're all muted, feel free to join me in showing your applause, or snaps, however you want to show it, waves, yes, love it. Or you can use your reaction tools on the bottom there. Those are also fun. If you have any questions, please feel free to share them in the chat. We're going to have rich conversations today, so leverage that chat to engage with speakers, the content, one another. I see those intros coming in. Awesome. Hi, Teddy. Hi, Catherine. We'll also be using breakout sessions today, so if you're disconnected from the meeting, just join with that same link and we'll get you back in here. For technical questions, we have, you'll find them on the list, Zoom admin Dallas. It'll probably be towards the end or towards the top. If you have any questions, please feel free to chat Dallas, and Dallas will help you. So we're really thankful for that and excited. Yes, keep those introductions coming. We'll get started with our morning plenary. We'll keep introductions brief. Please refer to the document with bios as well as the program for more information on our brilliant speakers. I'm honored to invite our powerhouse SFCAHT co-chairs, Benita Hopkins and the Honorable Judge Susan Briel, to share a welcome and introduce our next speakers. Benita is a civic leader in our community and currently serves as the Northern and Central California liaison for the DeVos Urban Leadership Institute, and Judge Briel presides over dependency matters as the California Superior Court Judge of the City and County of San Francisco. Benita and Judge Briel, passing everyone to you.
Thank you so much, Katie, and welcome everyone. I'm so excited to be here once again. I want to welcome the participants, the survivors, the youth advocates, the volunteers, the representatives of law enforcement, representatives of the public defender's offices, businesses, and service providers to our 9th annual SFCAHT conference. I want to thank the entire team that planned this conference. I'm going to ask the team to please raise your virtual hands so that everyone can see who you are. You went to meeting after meeting after meeting. You're raising your hands. I see it. Some real hands, some reaction hands. Thank you all so much for your hard work in planning this conference. Now, for over 12 years, SFCAHT has been providing coordination of efforts in the Bay Area to fight human trafficking through prosecution, through prevention, through protection of survivors. And we really take pride in our achievements over the years. We are delighted today to share our most recent accomplishment. It is the creation of the San Francisco Human Trafficking Hotline. We are grateful to the San Francisco Department on the Status of Women for providing the funding for this exciting project. And we thank the SFCAHT member agencies for their help to develop the concept for the hotline, its protocols, its resources. The hotline is scheduled to start its 24/7 operation. That's right, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week on October 18th, and will be operated by the National Council of Jewish Women San Francisco. This hotline's phone number is 415-907-9911. You're going to want to write this down, 415-907-9911. And please help spread the word via your networks. So I want to just acknowledge Antonia Levine for her being so instrumental in developing this hotline. We are so incredibly grateful and excited. Now, this is the start of our conference, and it's our 9th conference. And what's important is that today is Native American Day. So I'm going to turn the podium over to my illustrious co-chair, Benita Hopkins, to announce the start of a ceremony.
Thank you, Judge Briel and Katie, and welcome to all of you to our annual symposium. It is everyone's business, everybody's business, the prevention and protection of our youth. It gives me great pride, actually, and pleasure today to participate and acknowledge this Native American Day as a part Native myself from the southeast of our country, the Algonquin, the Rappahannock, the Chickahominy peoples and lands there where I grew up and am a part of. It gives me great pleasure to acknowledge them today. Native peoples have been stewards of the spaces we call home for generations. As part of offering collective respect and acknowledgement, we invite you to share in the chat from which Indigenous territory you are joining us from today. If you do not know, you can check using a link that we're dropping in the chat right now, courtesy of the Native Land Digital. So that is landing in the chat. In the San Francisco Bay Area, the Ohlone are represented by various groups throughout the region. The San Francisco Collaborative Against Human Trafficking, SFCAHT, is situated in the city and county of San Francisco. This is the ancestral homeland of the Ramaytush Ohlone peoples. We recognize that the Ohlone peoples of the San Francisco Bay Area were colonized by settlers. This includes a history of trafficking of indigenous peoples. We acknowledge the harms of the past and hope for healing in the future. We are fortunate today to be joined by Carrie Hertel, who is Esalen Rumsen Ohlone, a survivor leader and a tribal leader. Carrie will offer a prayer for us now. Carrie, unmute yourself.
There we go. I'm now unmuted and standing with you in acknowledgement. I'd like to acknowledge, as we do to the ancestors, and for all of you, our acknowledgement. We acknowledge that we are on the unceded ancestral homeland of the Ramaytush Ohlone, who are the original inhabitants of the San Francisco Peninsula As the indigenous stewards of this land and in accordance with their tradition, the Ramaytush Ohlone have never seceded, lost, nor forgotten their responsibilities as the caretakers of this place, as well as for all peoples who reside in their traditional territory. As guests, we recognize that we benefit from living and working on their traditional homeland. We wish to pay our respects by acknowledging the ancestors, the elders, relatives of the Ramaytush community, and by affirming their sovereign rights as First People. And this was adopted by the San Francisco Human Rights Commission, November 12th, 2020. Again, my name is Carrie Hertel. As a survivor, leader, and a representative of the history of California Ohlone people, and as a survivor leader, I will offer a prayer of reconciliation. Makpida ana use makmisi ushin makroteki shudududu. Makpida ana use makmisi ushin makroteki shudududu. Thank you very much. Enjoy the conference.
Thank you for grounding us with that prayer, Kari. That was wonderful. Next, we have a video address from the California Attorney General, Rob Bonta. Thanks for your patience as I screen share the video.
Good morning. I'm Rob Bonta, California Attorney General. I appreciate the opportunity to welcome you to the San Francisco Collaborative Against Human Trafficking 2021 conference. As I welcome you, let me also express my sincere gratitude. Thank you to each of you for the work you lead. I want you to know that as the state's chief law officer, I join you in this fight. I am doing everything in my power to end this heinous crime. Working to end human trafficking is an absolute top priority for me as I lead over 5,000 lawyers, special agents, and hardworking employees at the California Department of Justice. I see my role as the people's attorney, an attorney general who stands up for everyday people and those hurt, harmed, abused, and mistreated. That's why just weeks into this job, one of my first major actions was formally launching new regional human trafficking and sexual predator apprehension teams and issuing guidance to law enforcement statewide to help protect sexually exploited youth. Human trafficking is modern-day slavery. It's a slavery happening right here, in plain sight, in our own backyards, in our own neighborhoods, and in our own cities. Today, you will hear from some outstanding people and organizations who are spearheading efforts to tackle this issue head-on, including the Director of the Bureau of Investigation at the California Department of Justice, Stephen Woolery. At the California DOJ, our approach to this work follows the 4 Ps: partner, prevent, protect, prosecute. Today, it's all about partner. As you hear from survivors, service providers, law enforcement agencies, businesses, and volunteers, ask yourself, how can we better work together to support our communities and empower survivors? How can we partner to right this unacceptable wrong? In closing, I'd like to thank our governor and vice president for launching the San Francisco Collaborative over a decade ago when they were mayor and district attorney. I also am grateful to the Honorable Superior Court Judge Susan Briel and Benita Hopkins for their leadership in co-chairing the collaborative today. And to each of you here, thank you for the work you lead to prevent, partner, prosecute, and protect. Human trafficking is the human rights issue of this era. Let's continue to work together and demand human dignity for everyone. Enjoy today's conference, and I hope to join you all in person soon when we can all safely gather again. Thank you.
Wonderful. And we look forward to being in the same room together too, in person. Moving right along for our opening remarks, I'd like to invite Acting United States Attorney for the Northern District of California, Stephanie Hines, to speak. Passing everyone to you, Stephanie.
Thank you. Good morning. And first, let me thank SFCAHT for the opportunity and the invitation to speak today. SFCAHT, since its inception in 2010, has been an important partner with our office. We have been pleased to work alongside you for the past 11 years. Each year, this coalition tirelessly works to broaden awareness of the plague of human trafficking and strengthen the partnership of law enforcement, private sector partners, and nonprofits in combating human trafficking. So a big thank you from your federal partners on those efforts. The prosecution and deterrence of sex and labor trafficking in all of its criminal forms is a priority for the United States Department of Justice and our office. The United States Attorney's Office and our federal, state, and local partners are making significant efforts to investigate and prosecute individuals and organizations engaged in human trafficking. We constantly strive to do more and improve how we identify, track down traffickers, bring them to justice, and assist the many victims. In July 2020, in an effort to enhance our efforts to combat human trafficking at the federal level, our office established the Federal Human Trafficking Collaboration, or the FHTC. The FHTC is an informal collaboration of more than a dozen federal investigative agencies that either encounter or investigate sex and labor trafficking. As the federal government is one of the largest bureaucracies in the world, with numerous opportunities to encounter and identify trafficking victims, as well as identify trafficking conduct, through its various criminal, civil, and regulatory components, we decided that bringing these various agencies together on a regular basis would prove an important information sharing and investigatory tool. The purpose of the FHTC is to directly engage a variety of often disparate federal components in a collaborative effort to leverage our ability to identify, investigate, and combat, and hopefully prosecute human trafficking. This endeavor has had promising results. Despite the many challenges of the past year, 2020 was quite a year. Our office opened approximately 8 new sex and labor trafficking investigations across all 3 of our branches, Oakland, San Jose, and San Francisco. As these same challenges have continued well into 2021, our office remains steadfast in working closely with our law enforcement partners to identify potential cases and get them assigned to our prosecutors in our office for development and charging. Our office and my federal peers are dedicated to the eradication of this misery this heinous crime inflicts on its usually vulnerable and too often underage victims. Human traffickers in the Bay Areas recruit abused, addicted, and otherwise vulnerable adults and children, often under false pretenses, to work under terrible conditions for little or no compensation. These victims are exploited by their traffickers as sex workers, construction workers, restaurant workers, farm workers, and caregivers. They are often shuttled between work site at the whims of their traffickers, who isolate them from loved ones and support systems, subject them to all manner of humiliation and abuse to keep them compliant, and manipulate them into believing that they cannot escape. Traffickers make millions in profits from coerced labor schemes, whether for sex or labor. Organized gangs profit immensely from this crime. Victims rescued from trafficking enterprises often face a lifetime of recovery from this physical and psychological trauma inflicted by their traffickers. Human trafficking is a global problem, as much as it is a local one. This conduct has no place in a civilized and lawful society. Let me share with you a few cases representative of the work our office has been doing, in particularly keeping with today's theme protection of our youth. For example, in November 18, 2020, a convicted child sex trafficker was sentenced to 10 years in prison. The defendant was sentenced after pleading guilty. He admitted that between August 2018 and January 2019, he caused a minor to engage in sex in exchange for money. He prostituted the minor by driving her to an area in Oakland known for prostitution and dropping her off. He then monitored her location by requiring her to share her cell phone data with him. He admitted that he required the minor to earn at least $500 a night before allowing her to come off the streets. We are also successful in trying other cases. In March of 2020, our strike force, our gang unit, prosecuted members of the CDP, a violent San Francisco criminal gang that ran a prostitution ring, among other crimes. They were convicted and are serving lengthy sentences regarding their offenses. And most recently, in August of this year, a federal jury convicted a South Bay man of child pornography and child enticement charges. This case addressed the sex tourism aspect of the trafficking problem. The investigation revealed that in 2013, the defendant solicited and paid individuals in the Philippines to create custom-made child pornography at his direction, which was transmitted to him live via webcam. The defendant admitted requesting and watching sex acts carried out by children between the ages of 3 and 12, during his webcam viewing sessions. The defendant stated he would typically request that the children perform sexual acts on each other or on adults. This case is currently pending sentencing here in our courts. The United States Attorney's Office is committed to actively pursuing human trafficking in its many forms, whenever and wherever we can. We work actively with all of our law enforcement partners. I'd like to acknowledge the work of a few of our state and local partners, the Alameda County District Attorney's Office through Heat Watch, the Contra Costa District Attorney's Office through their collaborative human trafficking task force, as well as the Santa Clara District Attorney's Office and its task force. We welcome the opportunity to partner with other state and local authorities in the fight against human trafficking. We are committed to seeking justice for victims of these serious crimes however we can. These cases are often difficult to prove. It takes leadership and the commitment at every level, and a strong relationship with our community partners and the bravery of the victims who come forward. With these essential partnerships in place, it will enhance our ability to do as this conference is focusing on, protect and hopefully prevent, and when necessary, prosecute those who victimize the community. Thank you.
Thank you so much for the work that you're doing. Next, I'd like to invite the Director of the Bureau of Investigations at the California Department of Justice, Stephen Woolery, to share your opening remarks.
Good morning, everyone. With respect to U.S. Attorney Hines, it's always tough to go after her. I'm a retired FBI senior executive. You may not remember me, but we've been in a few meetings along the way. Let me just say that to the dignitaries on the call, colleagues, SFCAHT leadership, organizers, members, thank you for having me on for a few minutes. On behalf of the 1,000 men and women of the California Department of Justice's Division of Law Enforcement, I'm honored to be here. You know, when I was looking at the flyer and signing on or, registering, I looked at the title, and the title for the conference really, I think, underscores what AG Bonta said, and certainly what U.S. Attorney Hines said in terms of partnership. So the part of the title that really grabbed me was, it's everybody's business And, you know, how often in our separate walks of life do we, you know, encounter things and address things? And sometimes we hear the opposite, right? We hear, oh, that's not my business. Or we often hear, that's not my job. Or we often hear, let the police handle that. Let the victim advocates handle that. Let the community handle that. And I just think that with these adapting realities, and of course, human trafficking is the topic of the day, but also in so many other things that negatively impact our community, we need to raise the standard. And you all are doing that. You have been doing that for the last several years in terms of a holistic approach, or to use what we often hear, a whole of society approach. So when I see those of you on the call, when I see that there are survivors on the call, there are members of the private sector, members of social services, members of victim advocacy. When I say members, I also imply leaders in those sectors. I see leaders in law enforcement. I see leaders in academia and other non-traditional law enforcement partners. And, you know, I'm gonna have to stop saying that, because these days, there's really no such thing as non-traditional law enforcement partners. We're all partners. You know, we are all partners in this, and we all have our roles to play, and they're all impactful. They're all significant, and I run the risk at this moment of being Captain Obvious by saying that we cannot arrest our way out of this. So I join you today in the presentations. I know it was said earlier that the speakers will come and go, and they'll get off the call once the speakers are done. I won't. I will stay, because I want to hear about innovation today. I want to hear about resilience today. I want to hear about, we're just not going to take this anymore, a zero tolerance attitude today. I want to hear about the partnerships today that are critical catalysts in combating this threat. I'd like to take this opportunity to share with you and expand upon what AG Bonta talked about in terms of the DOJ-led enforcement groups. And when I talk about these groups, and I'll be very brief, I just want you to know that this is at the heart of how we protect our most vulnerable. Because that's really why I've been in the business that I've been in for 32 years, to really have a voice and be able to protect those who are most vulnerable in our society. So let me first talk about a newly sort of formalized, we've been doing this for several years, of course, in an ad hoc way, but through full-throated support from the California legislature. We were funded a couple of years ago for 2 human trafficking sexual predator apprehension teams. We refer to them as SFCAHT. AG Bonta went public with this formally a couple of months ago, and we have an SFCAHT team in Sacramento. And this team is based out of the Bureau of Investigation regional office located on Broadway. And we partner, of course, with many of the local task forces that are already in creation. But these task forces that I'm mentioning are DOJ-led, and again, with full-throated support from the California legislature. The second team I want to talk to you about is the Fresno-based SFCAHT team, located in Fresno. And this team, of course, comprises special agents from the Department of Justice and local partners, and in similar fashion to the other task forces located throughout the state. But I would add that this is a statewide agency in terms of the Department of Justice, and that that's what we bring to the table. We bring some connectivity across the state. We join our federal partners who bring that connectivity across state lines. We certainly find value and impact being able to make those connections throughout the great state of California. And then lastly, the San Diego Human Trafficking Task Force is a bit longer in the teeth, as they say, not at all a new enforcement group, but certainly impactful. The San Diego Human Trafficking Task Force boasts a partnership formally with 26 agencies in the real South Bay. I know some folks think that Southern California, Hermosa Beach, and places like that along the basin in LA are the South Beach or South Bay, but the real South Bay, I submit to you, is San Diego. And of course, San Diego, with all of its proximity to other sovereign countries and things of that nature, provides a bit of challenge and a bit of robust activity in this topic. But I would submit to you that the relationships in the real South Bay are formidable and cemented. That concludes my comments. I just want to leave you with this thought. I can't say enough how pleased I am and happy to be invited to be with you all today. These adapting realities are, we've seen upticks in online activity related to the human trafficking threat. We've seen the recidivism rates in this particular area or space within the criminal element. We've seen the recidivism rates continue to soar, and we've seen declining resources in law enforcement abound. So again, partnerships are the criticality as we move forward. Thank you for your time, and I look forward to spending the day with you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Am I off mute? Yeah, awesome, cool. My Zoom is glitching, so sorry about that. Thank you so much for your remarks. Next, I'd like to invite back SFCAHT co-chair Benita to introduce our amazing keynote speaker.
My pleasure, Katie. Thank you. And thank you to our speakers of the morning. Our keynote speaker for this morning is Miss Nola Brantley of Nola Brantley Speaks. Nola has been advocating for young sex trafficking victims and survivors since 2005 and has become one of our nation's leading survivor leaders. During the summer of 2007, Nola co-founded MISSY, an organization in Oakland, California, dedicated to serving young survivors and working towards positive systemic change. Under Nola's leadership, MISSY served over 1,000 victims and survivors and trained over 15,000 professionals and community members. Nola transitioned from her role as MISSY's executive director in May of 2014 after 7 incredible years of organization growth and impact. I'm proud to say I am one of those whom Nola taught and trained back in the day, way back there in 2009. Currently, Nola is working as a master trainer through her survivor consultancy company, Nola Brantley Speaks, where she has already trained over 200,000 individuals, as well as developed several curricula. Prior to her directorship at MISSY, from 2001 to 2007, Nola directed the Parenting and Youth Enrichment Department at the Scotland Center, where she developed the first case management model for child sex trafficking survivors in Alameda County. Simultaneously, she served as a volunteer on call advocate for the Oakland Police Department's Special Victims Unit from 2005 to 2007. Nola's love for the people and passion for the cause fuel her today. It gives me great pleasure to introduce my friend and SFCAHT's Trailblazer of the Decade award winner for 2021, Miss Nola Brantley of Nola Brantley Speaks. Nola?
Thank you so much, Benita, and thank you to everybody. You're going to make me get tearful with just the introduction. You know, I can be an emotional one. I really was inspired by the words, I believe it was Stefan that spoke right before me. I was really inspired by those words. So thank you for those words, as well as Ms. Hines that spoke as well. So thank you for those words. I might have missed any others, but I caught y'all too. So thank you. So I'm really excited to be invited to be your keynote speaker. And I'm really excited as well about the theme, it's everybody's business, because it really is. And this is the thing about that theme, I love it, because it's everybody's business. And if you don't make it your business, it's still gonna become your business. You know, and this is, when I say this, I mean, I've seen this issue touch so many people, you know, even people that, you know, don't fit the typical profile of who we might see in the service community. You know, I've just seen this hit so many people. It really is everybody's business. So I love that title and that theme that we're focused on. Benita gave you a great, you know, introduction to who I am and my journey in this work. It's so inspiring to really sit back and hear all that's been accomplished in such a short time around this topic. So hats off to myself and everybody else that's been doing this work for quite some time. We have definitely made a huge difference. And I say this like, it's real. It is so real, because when I started doing this work, you know, a while ago now, I guess almost 20 years ago, I don't want to age myself too much, but when I started doing this work about 20 years ago, the story I would hear from a typical young person that was being sex trafficked, especially in foster care, it sounded identical to my mother's situation, and she's 83 now, right? And I would be like, that would be devastating. Like, wow, all these years have passed and these kids are having the same experience when it comes to this issue. But now, you know, just, you know, even 10 years after we started the work, to be honest, I would talk to a young person who had this experience, and their experience may not be perfect, but so much different in the right direction than it was before. And thinking that, well, you know, there was 60 years that went by and there didn't seem to be no change. And then in 10 years, 20 years, we've been able to make all of this change. I just think we have to celebrate that. And sometimes, you know, we can get really caught up in what's not happening. And don't get me wrong, there is work to be done. But I think we really have to celebrate all that has happened. So thank you, Benita, for kind of taking me down my own personal journey and reminding me of all the contributions, because, you know, I think when we leave this earth, you know, that's what's left, the contributions. And so I really appreciate that. I want to tell you a little bit more about who I am, because I am a survivor of child sex trafficking in the commercial sex industry as a young adult. And there's a path that led me there, right? And so I want to talk about who I am a little bit more before I get into some of my other speaking points with you all. And so I am a descendant of Africans that were enslaved in America. This is an important part of my end result, and I think we don't sometimes recognize that. My ancestors experienced murder, brutality, exploitation, and rape at the hands of white slave owners. During the time my ancestors' enslavement, Black females were over-sexualized and represented as symbols of lust, sexual immorality, and even innate wickedness. Ideas like Black females having an insatiable appetite for free and loose sex were common, and they were used to justify sexual abuse and exploitation. During the time of my ancestors' enslavement, sexual exploitation became a weapon of political terror. One of the lasting impacts of slavery has been Black females being stereotyped as consenting prostitutes. And that plays into my end result of ending up being a child in the commercial sex industry and a young adult, you know, that was in the commercial sex industry. And it plays into so many other people's experiences. And I'm going to talk about that more later, but we often talk about this as a gender-based issue, which is also problematic, and I'm going to touch on that. But sometimes we don't try to talk about it as it pertains to race. And that is so important. This is absolutely an issue that intersects with racism and the impact of historical oppression. And until we make those connections, you know, we might be able to make some impact, but we will not be able to make the impact I think that we're all hoping for. I'm also the daughter of a mother who went into the New York State foster care system at 3 years old and was in a New York State psychiatric institution by the age of 12 as a result of that. She tried taking her own life before she even reached the age of 13, you know, and so that also has shaped me. Having a mother that's a survivor of foster care, it's one of my 3 top risk factors when I tell my story. So we have to continue to look at our foster care system, because what's coming out of it is heartbreaking. And not just for me, but for kids right now today as well. So we just have to continue to look at that system and continue to think about how we can serve these kids best who have already experienced abuse and neglect. And we got to think about the roots of that system, because the racial biases and the racism that I'm talking about, it exists in that system too. And we have it in the research and data. So we have to look at the roots of that system. I'm also the daughter of a father who escaped his own family due to patterns of sexual abuse and entered the Army and soon after the Vietnam War at the age of 17. My father was a platoon leader in the jungles of Vietnam. And when he came back to the United States, very mentally ill, after staying in the duration of the war, they would not take responsibility for his disability. And so my father began to self-medicate with crack cocaine, and he's still a crack addict today. 10 years ago, they decided, you know what? It was from the Vietnam War. We'll give you your full benefits now. But how much do you think full benefits are benefiting a crackhead? So, that's also part of my story and how I ended up where I ended up in the commercial sex industry. And I feel like all of these things are really important for you all to understand. I come from patterns of generational poverty and generational trauma, but also generational resiliency. I am actively working to strengthen some cycles and to break others. I am a survivor of sexual abuse, sexual exploitation, and commercial sexual exploitation. I am a humanitarian standing against all forms of injustice against all people all over the world. I am a mother. I am a grandmother. I am a dog mother. And I consider myself a spiritual being. I'm also a lover of nature and music and deep soulful connections with other human beings. And so I think it's really important, I know that I have a limited amount of time and I could have spent it only talking about the points, but I think letting you get to know me and who I am is really important in terms of understanding this issue and who it impacts, right? Because there was so much in what I just shared with you about so many other people that are impacted by this issue. And so there's a few other things I want to touch on. I definitely want to spend a few moments touching on some populations within this population of youth who are trafficked and sometimes at high risk that we oftentimes don't talk about. And so I want to touch on that here for a bit with you. And I really want to start off with the population of males. And I want to read you a quote. Sexual victimization is typically presented as a gender-based problem involving a female victim and a male offender. Science, policy, and society focus on female victims at the expense of male victims. Male sexual victimization is thus understudied compared with female sexual victimization. The underrepresentation of male victims was found to be rooted in prevailing gender roles and accepted sexual scripts in society, together with rape myths and stereotypical rape scripts. The former prescribes men as the dominant and sexually active gender. The latter denies male sexual victimization and frames women as ideal victims. And I really wanted to take a few minutes to touch on this because we have a lot of work to do when it comes to our young men. Oftentimes when we're talking about exploitation, we're not talking about our young men. They are left out of the conversation because of things like gender stereotypes, because of things like myths around male sexual abuse, because of things like failure to acknowledge male victimization. And so that's something that we really got to put some focus on. I mean, the average man who experiences sexual abuse does not come out about it until he's like in his mid-30s. That imagine after career, college, marriage, maybe children, and they're carrying around the burden of being sexually abused because in our society, we haven't created safe spaces for them to talk about their sexual abuse, much less their exploitation. And most of our programs and services, the way they're targeted, if I was the male, I wouldn't think there was any help available for me because it would look like everything was targeted towards the female population. And so we need to work on that. And this is the thing. And this is why I know we need to work on it. In the last 10 years, just 10 years, what we've done for females, say we've done 500 for females, just give it a number. If I gave a number to what we've done for the males compared to the females, they get 50. and the females have got 500. That's not acceptable. You know, we need to get on this because remember, a vulnerable kid is a vulnerable kid. Gender does not make any difference with that. Okay, so that's one population I wanted to touch on. Another one that I want to touch on is, also I want to add that in Norway, Sweden, and Canada, where they've looked at males more, they found similar rates of exploitation amongst males and females. So catch that fact. So another population I want to touch on is our LGBTQ youth. Our LGBTQ youth, they are at such a risk for this. First of all, they make up a small part of the youth population and a big part of the homeless youth population. And our homeless youth are like one of the main targets. And this is what I know. Let me keep it real with you guys, because I do a full day training on commercial sexual exploitation of transgender females and gay cis males. And this is what I have found to be true. Most people working in the field, regardless of their role, therapists, probation officers, boom, boom, boom. It doesn't matter. This is not about pointing fingers at any one person. But when I do this training, I have to spend the majority of the day just helping people understand the experiences of the LGBTQ community. We barely even get to talk about the exploitation because people are so misguided and don't understand that these individuals face discrimination at every part of society. And yes, we have the best laws in California. Hoorah. That don't mean we have the best implementation, because people that do the kind of work that we do, that are in these spaces like the one you're in right now, they are struggling with how to work with the LGBTQ population. They're even struggling to accept and embrace some LGBTQ people in their own families. And this is honest feedback I've gotten from people, and I love them for it. We struggle where we struggle, you know, but it's something that we have to be real about, because this is another fact. According to studies, our LGBTQ youth would rather trade sex for a place to stay than go into a shelter or foster care due to sexual assault. So we need to really harassment, sexual assault, and not just by like their peers, by the staff as well in those facilities. So again, we really need to pay attention to our LGBTQ population if we want to protect and prevent this, because they are experiencing this a whole lot. It's almost like it's a given for so many of them, especially if they're thrown out of their homes, which is a very common experience. Another group that I want to touch on is our Native American youth. They experience this at disproportionate rates, and I don't even want to get started because I'll go off on a tangent, because we know that what's happening to them is rooted back in historical oppression. You know, their exploitation dates back to the colonization of these lands. Are we going to pretend like we don't know that and understand that? You know what I mean? And so, yeah, they have lost everything: culture, religion, language, relatives. They've lost everything, and it's resulted in hurt and shame and cultural inferiority and incomplete mourning. And the list can go on. You know, so of course it makes sense that one of the impacts of that, and they were also used as breeders. They were also seen as loose, because the oppressor, he played that same tired game on everybody. We just don't get together so we can figure it out. You feel me? So they experienced a lot of things that are similar to African-American slavery experience. It's so similar, you know, and oftentimes, you know, even now, like with the missing and murdered Indigenous movement, you know, in 2016, there were 5,700 plus Native women and girls that were missing or murdered, and we only had 116 of those cases logged into the Department of Justice database. They've had to create their own database. Imagine how horrifying that is. So given all those risk factors that exist, that's another population that we need to be paying special attention to, that oftentimes we're not, but we need to. You know, definitely I touched on earlier in my own story, so I don't need to touch on this too more, about the African-American population. You know, I think the lasting impact of slavery has not only been Black females being seen as consenting prostitutes, but it also has been Black males being seen as sexual deviants and criminals. You know, this was the lasting impact of slavery. By the way, you know, felon, slave, you know, criminal, slave, you know, interchangeable in some circles. So the bottom line is that, you know, there was a lasting impact of slavery that impacts what we see right now in the commercial sex industry, especially how complacent so many systems have been for so many years, and not just systems, community too, around the number of Black women and girls that have been exploited just right out in the open, you know? And so Sometimes we don't understand because we haven't had a chance to deconstruct this stuff. But sometimes we don't have a strong response to things because there's certain ideas and views that have been passed down throughout the generations about certain people. And unless we are working consciously to deconstruct it, how would we know it's there? We were born into it, period. I'm gonna read you a quote here. Controlling images of Black womanhood as unvirtuous, immoral, and blameworthy impact interactions between Black girls and the juvenile justice system, as well as service providers. By overlooking race, the Trafficking Victims Protection Act and anti-trafficking advocates do not anticipate and remedy the complexity of applying a victim standard to Black girls and other marginalized youth. And this is the thing, according to the work of Dr. Monique Morris, and she's brilliant and from the Bay Area, as early as the age of 12 years old, Black girls start getting blamed for their own victimization. As early as 12, they could no longer see Black girls as victims of their own victimization. So what does that mean for the average Black girl in the commercial sex industry? Think about it and the experience they have. A couple of other populations I want to touch on would be our unaccompanied youth. Youth migrating as unaccompanied minors are inherently vulnerable to exploitation through the migration process, or may become victims of commercial sexual exploitation on arriving at their destination through being forced to pay back debts to traffickers. And check this out. Just in 2019, there were over 76,000 kids that crossed the Southwest border alone. And that was a 52% increase from the previous year. And unfortunately, some of our outcomes aren't that great. You know what I mean? I wish they were, but we got some work to do. From 2014 to 2018, the Office of Refugee Resettlement received 4,556 allegations of sexual abuse or sexual harassment allegations, while unaccompanied minors were in our detention facilities. So if they're not getting exploited, they getting primed for it before they even get to hit the land. Also, 75 to 80% of unaccompanied youth travel with smugglers, many of whom are sold into labor or sex trafficking, which is why we also need to give equal attention to labor trafficking. I know it kind of shakes the foundation of our nation, but I think we're kind of in the mood of doing that nowadays to get to a better place. So we're gonna have to look at it because it is also a huge problem. Related, but thank you, Katie. A related but distinct group would be our undocumented youth. And there's also, you know, their exploitation oftentimes goes unseen and unreported. It could be a taboo topic in their community. They can fear deportation of their self or family members, especially in this ICE age. And there's also language and institutional barriers. So my time is coming to a wrap. So the last thing that I want to wrap it up with is this idea of love. Because to be honest with you, the thing that I have seen more youth be trafficked for than anything else is a desperation for love. And I know we don't want to hear that because that is jacked up. I know we don't want to hear that. But I have seen more youth be trafficked because they were desperate for love, attention, and affirmation. We got babies walking around desperate to feel something, numbing out in every kind of way because they're desperate to feel something. And I know about this intimately. I was 13 years old the first time I came to my own mother and asked her why she had never said she loved me. And although her answer was a kind one, and I told you her story so you can understand, you know, how it might came to be that way, it didn't fill the gap that had grown for 13 years prior. And I went on to do anything for love, no matter what the cost. And I would like to see some of our babies, our young people, be able to find love in other ways. We may not be able to love them like their mother or father, like their brother or sister, or like their lover, but we could love them like their lawyer or their PO or their social worker or their community member, because love transforms all things. It certainly has transformed me. Thank you.
Wow, thank you so much, Nola. Thank you for, let me just get that. Thank you for your passion, your energy. Your words are so powerful. We're grateful. I got chills. I'm sure a lot of us do. Next, we're going to be moving on to the next part of our conference. We're all jazzed up and energized. I'm excited to invite you to our breakout sessions. At registration, you chose your breakout. So based on this information, you'll be automatically sent to your selected breakout room. We'll have 2 sets of these breakouts in the morning. It's the same for repeated. We're grateful to have Dallas and our volunteers providing technical support to place participants in the rooms. Dallas and I will stay in the main room to help anyone who has not been sent or joins later. Once the breakout's over, you'll be transferred back into the main meeting. Our 4 breakouts are as follows. We have session 1, which is on the prevention of child trafficking. Session 2 is children trafficked at the border, myths and reality. Session 3 is utilizing data collection and analysis in fighting human trafficking. Session 4 is anti-human trafficking education and public awareness in the San Francisco Bay Area. And if you're disconnected from the meeting, use the same link to join and we'll get you in there. Our next speaker will be Kiyomi Amerix, who's a child and adolescent
let me
psychiatrist.
get
Go
my
ahead, Kiyomi.
video going. Come on, video. Come on, video. Okay, well, you guys might just hear my voice. Oh, there we go. Come on. Almost. We went off and then we went back on. Okay, so that I'm not wasting any time. Hi, I'm Kiyomi Amerix. I'm just going to fill in the spot here. So I am a child and adolescent psychiatrist at Kaiser Permanente. I am also the medical director there of the San Francisco Autism Evaluation Center. To kind of give you some background, I don't just just give medicine, but I also do a lot of work with kids with trauma and really getting their nervous system to reset so that they are able to do the trauma work. I'm also a member of the Child Abuse Services and Prevention Committee and the Kaiser Northern California Region Anti-Human Trafficking Group. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk about our nervous system. I'm moving kind of quickly just so we can go into our breakout rooms at any time. So wanted to share with you guys that we have a brain, and then from there we have our spinal column, and running up and down our spinal column are nerves. And what happens is that when we are anxious and we're feeling really stressed out, certain nervous system parts, called our sympathetic nervous system, actually begins to amp up, and we feel really kind of amped up so that we can get ready to fight, flight, freeze. And for some of us who live in a trauma state or a high distress state, like I've been working 65 plus hours for the past 6 months per week, and then on the weekends. So I'm in a highly stressed state. And what happens is that our sympathetic nervous system kind of begins to run the show. And so we are kind of always amped up, always feeling a little frantic. We're not thinking up here in our top brain. We're thinking a little more in our lower brain where our emotions are. So things can set us off really quickly. Luckily, we have this wonderful other system. And I'm going to try to share my screen. We have this wonderful other system called the parasympathetic nervous system. And the parasympathetic nervous system is our rest and digest, which is what we call in medical school. It's also called kind of our rest and calm system. So I'm going to open something up so I can share my screen with you guys. So can I share my screen? Is it okay? Can you guys let me?
Yes.
Yes. Okay.
Yes.
Yes. All right, there we go. That's our nervous system. Told you we had 2 parts of it, right? The sympathetic and the parasympathetic. If you look at the blue, that's our parasympathetic. That's our rest and calm nervous system. In the middle of it is our sympathetic nervous system. That is our fight, flight, or freeze. So if you kind of notice that the parasympathetic bookends the sympathetic nervous system. So it's not scientific at all or medical at all, but I like to let my patients know, and I try to keep this in my mind, that it's almost like our parasympathetic is there to contain all that stuff that's going on in the sympathetic nervous system. So it's there to kind of hold it, make sure it doesn't get out of control. So kind of with that, we're going to work a bit on, I want to unshare, pause share, stop sharing. So we're going to work on how to decrease our sympathetic nervous system, where I'm sure everybody who's trying to get us into the breakout room, their sympathetic nervous system's just going crazy right now. So, and you know, all of us who are like, oh my gosh, we have all this time, our sympathetic nervous system's kind of ramping up too. So let's kind of reboot and get back into our parasympathetic nervous system, because it's really only when we are in that top part of our brain, not operating in the lower part of our brain, but the top part, that we can truly take in knowledge, use executive functioning, use planning skills, and retain what we're going to learn. So let's get to that place so that we can learn more effectively when we get into our breakout rooms. Okay. So we're going to start by some belly breathing. We're not going to do any stretches because we haven't been sitting that long. So belly breathing, putting our hands on our stomach, if you feel comfortable, or somewhere kind of near that. And then watching as you move, as you're breathing, what are your hands doing? They should actually be moving in and out. Belly breathing is actually when we take a sip of air in, it goes all the way down to our belly, and that's our inhale. And our exhale is almost like contracting our belly and pushing all of that air out. So we're going to work on that. And I'm going to do it with you. We're going to place our hands on our belly, and we are going to breathe in. Breathe in through your nose or your mouth, and your belly and your hands should expand. So if you have your hands like this, it should expand like that. As you breathe in, your hands should come together. This is another way to do it. Put your middle fingers together, go. And that distance should increase. Exhale. That distance gets smaller. Okay, so let's try that one more time. Inhale. Distance gets bigger. Exhale. Distance gets smaller. One more time just to make sure we have it. Breathing in. Distance gets bigger. Breathing out. Distance gets smaller. So we're going to use this type of breathing to kind of boot up our parasympathetic nervous system. Our exhales, and the longer that we actually use for that exhale, the safer our bodies feel. That's kind of the parasympathetic's way of saying, you know, you're okay. You're okay. Mind and body, you're okay. So, you know, kind of when we all have technical glitches, right? We all get a little frantic. And so let's kind of remind our body that, you know what? It's a technical glitch. This conference is going to be great. We're all here because we want to learn. So we're okay. Right? So what we're going to do is that we're going to do some breathing, and we're going to start, it's called autogenic autogenic relaxation. So basically, we're going to take our autonomic nervous system, our central nervous system, that parasympathetic and sympathetic, and we're going to get it to relax. Okay. So what we're going to do is that we're going to first, we're going to take in breaths in different counts. We're going to start with 3, and then we're going to hold our breath for 1 second, and then we're going to let it out for 4, and we're going to build on that. Please stop where, if you're feeling lightheaded, please stop if you're like, oh, I just can't take in that many breaths, or I know I'm not going to be able to, you know, go to that next step of letting out, you know, a breath for a 5 count. Totally okay to stop, totally okay to always go back to the other place. Okay. So let's begin. So everybody, please take a tall seat, or at least a seat where you're going to be able to breathe. If you're like this, it's really hard to do that. So please take a tall seat. Sometimes it's great to have our shoulders shrugged up and our shoulders shrugged down, and that actually begins to lengthen this area. So we're going to take a breath in for 3. So breathing in, 1, 2, 3. Hold it for 1 second. And breathing out, 1, 2, 3, 4. Next breathing in is going to be for 4. Breathing in, 1, 2, 3, 4. Hold for 1. Breathing out, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Breathing in, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Hold. And breathing out for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. This is a bigger one. Breathing in for 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Hold. Breathing out for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Last one. Breathing in for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Hold. Breathing out, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Relax your hands, sit up straight. So we actually calm our heartbeat that way. We calm our sympathetic, we reboot our parasympathetic, and then we're going to do one more thing. I want you to think of something that isn't serving you right now. Something that's just not working for you right now. Okay? And I want you to take a breath in. You're going to take this in through your nostrils. You're going to breathe out forcefully, but long. So longer than my count. You're going to breathe out what's not quite serving you. And put it in a direction that you feel like, you know what? It's going somewhere else. So we're going to breathe in and think about the thing that's not serving you for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Focus on getting that out and breathe out for the count of 7. 1, forcefully, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. That's called a reset breath. Okay. How are we doing? Looks like we are getting our breakout rooms together. All right. Well, then I'm hoping that we have reset our parasympathetic a little bit more, reset our heart rate, and are now able to have all of that oxygen and good energy up into the top part of our brain so that we can truly learn and use what we're doing today.
Thank you so much, Kiyomi. That was much needed for all of us.
You're welcome.
Awesome. So I believe that our breakout rooms should be ready now. Amazing. It's 12:30 and we are back. We are joined for the second half of the day with our keynote speaker. So get excited for this. And as a reminder, please share your questions and comments in the chat. Next, I'd like to invite Judge Briel, who will introduce our keynote.
Thank you so much, Katie. I am so incredibly excited to introduce our keynote speaker for this afternoon. Her name is T. Ortiz, sometimes known as Withelma T. Ortiz Walker Pettigrew, and she has single-handedly changed the way I, as a judge, handle missing children who were in foster care in my courtroom. She has single-handedly changed the way every single judge in America handles missing children in foster care, because she spoke to Congress and enabled a law to be passed that now says that we have to make sure missing children in foster care are reported to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children within 48 hours. And that's because of her powerful talk to Congress. When I heard her, I was speechless by the power of her words. She, in fact, received this year an honor from the National Center of Missing and Exploited Children. She was named the Hero Award recipient for her advocacy. In 2014, she was named Time Magazine's 100 Most Influential People in the World. She was also named Glamour Magazine's Woman of the Year in 2011. She's influenced so many organizations that I'll only name a few: the United Nations, Google, US Congress, the White House, the American Bar Association, Johns Hopkins. She has petitioned the Associated Press and changed the Associated Press in the way they utilize practices conscious of survivor trauma and circumstances with her No Such Thing as a Child Prostitute campaign. Her No Such Thing as a Child Prostitute campaign has now been adopted by the National Council of Juvenile and Family Court Judges. I cannot tell you how moved I was to hear her speak many years ago, and how I continue to hear her speak at every judge's training when they play the video of her talk. So it is my great honor and privilege to now introduce this magna cum laude graduate from Morgan State University. I present you with T.
Hello, everyone. Happy Friday. Oh my God, Susan, you almost made me cry. I was not expecting that. So I was over here like choking up, and I was like, be professional, stay faced. Okay. So obviously, thank you for that, Susan. That was an amazing introduction. And I just want to thank, the San Francisco Collaborative Against Human Trafficking for having me here. Big shout out to Benita for reaching out. I hadn't seen and talked to her for a while now. So it was such an honor to be introduced and have the opportunity to come speak to you all. Thank you all who are on the call. This is what I call my right on brothers and sisters. Many of you may be already experts in your own right. Others may be just learning about the issue. Either way, you are setting the course, the direction to launch, the future, for the next generation and the next steps to make sure that we're doing better in our prevention and our protection statutes. And I'm only here to hopefully empower you to continue to protect, serve, and support what you're doing and what we have yet to be doing, correct? So I am only one contributing perspective, and there are many, many out there. And I just hope that you embrace me with love and confidence, and that you hear my words with a mind that is supportive of the youth that we serve. So as some of you may know, I'm actually from Oakland. So although I'm not there in person, I'm definitely feeling the vibes from home. And I wish things were different. You guys know COVID sucks. So I can't wait for the day that this is all no longer the new normal, and I'm actually able to be there and see you all and have these conversations. I actually have a lot to say, but I'll try to keep it as direct as possible. First of all, shout out to the comms team or whoever made this title. I love it. Everybody's business, prevention and protection, which I feel 100%. And it really should and actually mean that this is everybody's business. I'm also going to hit you with a word that I know that we all kind of tend to shy away from. And let's just spell it out: accountability. Once again, accountability. But yes, that is what this is about. And for that, the important message that I have to say here is that we are all responsible. So I'm going to give you just a little snapshot of my current life. Recently, I gave birth to my son, and my first child. It was the most amazing, remarkable thing for me. And it definitely when they say being a parent in any regard changes your outlook on the world, oh my God. Talk about doing this work for 15 years and then having a baby boy in 2021. There's a lot of responsibility there. But not only did it make me change the way that I thought about, myself, what I want to present to the world, who I am, but it also made me start to focus on the things and people around me, be even more into understanding what's being said in media, things of that regard. And so we have all heard the old African proverb, it takes a village to raise a child, and God knows that's the truth. I have to shout out my friend that's actually watching my son right now as I'm here presenting to you guys. And it's really awesome because my son has something that is really important for all these young people to have, which is a mother and father who care. Yet so many and some of those young people who come from the child welfare, juvenile justice systems may not always have that. These youth, as many may know, are more vulnerable to being trafficked. And if you can't tell, if you haven't heard, those youth, those are my passion. They're the marginalized, the underserved, and sometimes forgotten cases of youth who, quote unquote, fall through the cracks. And these kids often go missing from care, which tends them to be vulnerable and perfect bait for traffickers. But did you notice I said missing from care instead of running away? The reason for that, right? It goes back to what we're talking about. This is everybody's business, and this is about accountability. And it is not on the youth themselves to keep them safe, but it is on us. And what do I mean by us? All of us, parents, service providers, health professionals, probation officers, lawyers, judges, law enforcement, educators, business personnel, liberators, religious leaders, peers, and the list goes on. We can put any title or name to it, but ultimately it's on the whole of us, on the entirety of our community to step up and keep them safe. So when a young person is subjected to trafficking, obviously there's many repercussions. For parents, they're affected by the lack of knowing the trauma that was endured, to the responses and reactions and PTSD thereafter. For service providers, we're taxed with the responsibility of providing social wellness and reintegration opportunities. For health professionals, they may endure secondhand trauma from victim statements and injuries. Probation officers sometimes have to look children the same age as their own children in the eye who have to endure hell every day. And law enforcement officers who are haunted by the determination to get justice against traffickers who aim to hurt these children. And peers, they may be coerced into similar subjection or persuaded into silence by seeing a friend or classmate being trafficked. So stay with me now. I know that's a lot. I know I've said a lot, but these people all have everyday interactions in school, work, home, the community that affect the way that they see the world, themselves and others. This is why it truly is everyone's business, because when these types of traumas happen, they don't solely happen to just the victim themselves. They happen to the community. They happen to all of us. And this is why, on a side note, this is also a public health and a public safety issue that we have to put more efforts in regards to that. But I just said a lot, like I said, that's a lot of different people, approaches, and interactions. So what can all these folks do combined to protect and prevent the trafficking that happens to these victims? Well, I love to talk about what I call is the 3 C's. You got to, first of all, be consistent. I can't say that enough. Those of us who have been working in this field know that recidivism is real and it's going to be taxing on you as a provider, but consistency is key. And that means showing up when that youth themselves aren't even actually aware that they need to show up. That means showing up when they're hungry. That means showing up when, parents or foster parents are, giving them trouble. That means showing up, when they're 15 and when they're 30. That means showing up. It's also about being coordinated. So we all have these efforts. We all come together. And I know that this group has a diverse plethora of experiences and of contributions. But we have to be coordinated in regards to making sure that our responses are necessary and effective. Lastly, my third C is cohesive. All of the services that we provide, we have to make sure that they're working in tandem and together for the benefit of the young person. All too often, and I know we all know it, in bureaucracy, we get caught up and things tend to work against each other. We've got a social worker here that's going against the, community agency here. We've got, the judge making mandates for this, and everything can be all over the place. We have to make sure that everything is cohesively working together in tandem for the benefit. So again, the 3 C's: consistent, coordinated, and cohesive. We also, although we don't pay a lot of attention to it, we have to start to support young parents. Unfortunately, generational system pipelines continue to happen if we don't support young parents, which again exemplifies the fact that there are more and more young people who are being vulnerable for sex trafficking. We have to enhance our LGBTQ resources. That means not just calling it out that they're at risk, but supporting them with the proper funding and the proper opportunities to provide the youth that go to and engage in their services the right opportunities and resources as they grow throughout their life. We have to make sure that we're always, and I will harp on this a lot, coming from a multidisciplinary approach. So we have to come from all sides of the wellness, of the educational piece, of the at-home piece, of the social welfare piece, of the healthcare piece. And we have to make sure that we are also always involving the young person in the decision-making. We have to do team decision-making, including that with the youth. We have to support and understand truly what trauma-informed services are and what they look like. We throw that term around willy-nilly sometimes, and it can be impeding to the overall work that we have to do, especially when people are on 2 different coins of what trauma-informed services are. What we need to know is that the young person and their wellness in entirety is at the center. And that is what we have to focus on. We also have to focus on encouraging reversion, first attention, always. And what do I mean by reversion? Is help them be who they were before the trauma. Help them find their passions. Help them explore new possibilities within themselves. Those are things that we have to focus on. Obviously, we all have a lot to work on. I will say that I think for the Bay Area, for San Francisco, Oakland, for California, period, I think that we are leading legislatively, yet there are still so much more work to be done. So we have to continue to put our efforts in alternate and court programs, innovation programs, girls' courts, star courts. I've heard these programs with multiple names, but these models work and they're important. We have to encourage self-esteem and self-exposure opportunities. I can't say that enough. Unfortunately, what these traffickers do is break everything in these young people of their potential, of what they can be, of who they are. And in order for us to help support young people to get that back, we have to make sure that they are being offered opportunities that encourage their self-esteem. I can say that doing this work for about 15 years now, I can't say enough how important it is that we not only just focus on the young people, so those who are under 18, but what happens when they have been exploited from 13 to 18, and then they're 19, what's next? So we have to really put our efforts also in after 18, what does that look like? Because there is this understanding or this, I guess, taboo conversation that's happening out there that, are they still exploited if they're 18 or not? I tell a lot of people that you can ask the right questions. You will often find that anyone that is over the age of 18 that, we don't see as a victim anymore. If you ask the right questions, you will see at some point in their childhood, they were victimized. They were made to believe that this was okay, that was happening to them. So we have to make sure that we are focusing on not only on the young people that we serve, but those after 18. Again, I'm preaching to the choir. I know that there's going to be a lot of here's on the next thing I'm going to say, but we have to not just focus on victim services, but we have to start to focus on demand. We have to focus on the root source of the issue. And I think that that's probably one of the hardest things to be realistic about in regards to the things that I've seen throughout the nation, is that we have implemented and we have grown so much with our victim services, but we have lost sight of what it means to call out these traffickers, call out these pedophiles for what they are and who they are, and make sure that we are putting them on a platform so that they will never do this again. I said earlier, and I'm going to say it again, multidisciplinary approaches. We need to allow for opportunities that are continuously supportive of their own economic control, those who are empowered, that are about empowering and embracing their bodies and their perspectives. Placements, homes, even living in the house with their parents. We have to make sure that we're encouraging environments that are gender supportive, that have open door, that are trauma informed, that are not just, again, locking them away and letting them deal with the trauma in whichever way that looks like, but giving them proper opportunities to work through it. And again, just as a side note, I know that a lot of this has been said and shared probably in a lot of these spaces, but this is why it's important. We have to hear the echo of what has to be different to make a difference for these children. We have to always advocate for all children to have the right to counsel. They may or may not be commercially sexually exploited, but every child is at risk and should be protected, especially in today's society. It's 2021. Have you looked around? Like, there's a show called P-Valley. There's like Hustlers in the movie theater. There's a lot of things that are encouraging this environment, this toxic sexuality environment. And we have to change that for our young people. Teach them their rights. We have to educate them about what those rights are, whether that's just providing them handouts. We have to make sure that they know the statutes and the laws that can keep them safe. There's a lot of young people out there right now that are being trafficked that would love to change their experience. And it may be up to you, the one person that comes in contact with them, that can educate them and allowing them to know that they do have some power. And that is very important. You have to keep them in the loop, always ensure to do proper one-on-ones. I understand some people only have just a little time with these young people, but making change makes effort. And that means that if you have a little more than 5 minutes to spend, if you are, say, a public defender, please do so. It's important to these young people's lives. Again, there are multiple people from different backgrounds on this call. And we have to have a full collaborative process. One thing that I'm hoping that we're talking about in both the morning and the afternoon breakout sessions is how are we working together? How are we going to streamline our services and make it, again, coordinated, cohesive for the young people and consistent? We also have to help find avenues in all the things that we do, whether it's healthcare, social welfare, education, of how to help young people identify emergency options. What are their options? Making sure that they have a safety plan in case they don't want to be at home or if they get into an unsafe situation with friends. This would give the community around them, adults around them, an opportunity to have some understanding of what the actions of that young person would be, say they get in a danger. You have to stay aware, because when young people are missing from care, it is, again, our business and everybody's business to make sure that we're following up. We know that we are in the day and age of 2021 with social media, with Snapchats and Instagrams and Facebooks. And is Tumblr still a thing? I'm not sure. I'm so sorry. I'm still out of the loop. But they have all of these different things. And we get so bogged down on, are they in placement or are they where they're supposed to be? We have to make sure that we're servicing young people no matter where they are. And in that, making sure that we're keeping track of what and where they are. We have to have cultural competence. And this one goes over a lot of people's heads. They're like, what does this have to do with trafficking? This is to the left. But if you don't know the language, the semantics in which young people are talking, you're not going to catch something if they're talking on the phone. You won't see how they're being pressured or persuaded by another individual. You have to know their traditions. What's the new trends? What is everybody doing? What is it that they will and won't do? You have to be mindful of the music. I'm certain everyone, I don't want to say everyone, but most of us may have heard of the artist Drake. And a lot of these young people know he actually just came out with a new album that everybody's talking about. Anyway, to know Drake is to know the young people, so somewhat. But one of his former songs is called For Free. And the lyric says, my sex is so good, I shouldn't have to for free. By understanding that this is the messaging that is being given to our children, we have a better understanding of how to combat that. If you don't know about what they're listening to or what they're looking at or what they're involving themselves with, we can't have an opportunity to help prevent their vulnerability. So these are all very important. I think another thing is that we have to remember to be flexible, to meet young people where they are. So this may not always be in your office or your home or at your school, or you have to meet them in between meetings. You have to meet them for a meal. Understanding that you may be the only person that they may be able to talk to. What I hope for this group is that we can start to provide the insight of the hopefulness of the dreams that we have for our own kids, that we too, it's everybody's business and it's our responsibility to have positive, hopeful outcomes for the young people that we serve, that we have to see the best in them and that we want them to reach their potential. I also think one thing that is very imperative in what we can do to prevent the vulnerability of young people being trafficked is changing the narrative of growing up to be interdependent versus independent. And what do I mean by that? When we share this ideology of you have to be independent, youth have this idea that they have to isolate, they have to do for self, they have to fend on own. That within themselves is going to make them more vulnerable. When we start to properly acknowledge and encourage young people to understand that interdependence is truly the life that we lived, that I couldn't have the opportunity to speak here today if someone didn't reach out to me, that many of you wouldn't be sitting in the seat that you are today if someone didn't hire you, that the person that hired you may not have an ability to get to work if someone else didn't help them get financed. We are all living in a world of interdependence versus independence. And when we allow young people to know this, it changes the way in which they feel like they have power, opportunity, and can fight against atrocities such as trafficking. We have to encourage every young person to seek every individual as a resource. And we have to pay attention and learn who they are specifically. We have to stop thinking that because we do the work, that they're all the same, or we see multiple trends and, they're just this kind of person. Learn who each individual young person that you work with is. So the pathway to hell is paved with good intentions. And yes, I'm going to call it out. Yes, We all are on this conference today because we all have positive and good intentions. But we have to understand that that also may impede our understanding in saying that we have a responsibility to focus on the needs of that young person, regardless of what our intentions are. Or shall I say, in contribution of what our intentions are. These young people may not understand their own victimization. Again, if you've been doing this work, you understand that wholeheartedly. And we can do all the good in the world, but we have to respect that in their own time and space, young people who have been through this atrocity will open up and heal. Can't say it enough. It's already obvious. These young people need your help. And they are full of resiliency, strength, and potential. So do your best to avoid further dehumanizing them with sympathy. Instead, empathize with them. Look in the perspective of empathy versus sympathy. So many others out there right now have lives and stories in which you may be the silver lining. And I know that to be true because there's been a few people on this call that I know have been my silver lining. So I want to end this with a quote that got me through so much in my life. But every day when I think about the issue of human trafficking and the atrocities that happen to our children, I have to hold this quote true to my heart. And it's a quote by SFCAHT, and it goes like this. The test of first-rate intelligence is the ability to hold two opposed ideas in the mind at the same time and still have the ability to function. One should, for example, see things as hopeless and yet be determined to make them otherwise. So I implore and I empower you to do just that. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much. That was incredible. I wish I could just like have it play daily to remind me. We're going to be moving on to our afternoon breakout sessions. All right, so I'm going to open up the rooms and it's going to be just like last time around, but a little bit smoother. We're going to have 4 sessions. Session 1 is male youth survivor services. Session 2 is utilizing technology. Session 3 is foster care and criminal justice. Session 4 is social media. All righty. So to start off our afternoon plenary, we're welcoming you back from those breakouts. Hope you enjoyed them and gained some valuable insight. And for our next speaker, we'll welcome back Kiyomi Kona-Amerix. And if you're just joining us, Kiyomi is a child and adolescent psychiatrist and the medical director of the Autism Spectrum Disorder Evaluation Center at Kaiser Permanente in San Francisco. Kiyomi will guide us through some more much needed self-care. Kiyomi, passing everyone to you.
Okay. So, just going to read something. So, a guy walks into a bar after a really long day at work and orders a drink. As he sits down, mulling over his day, a high-pitched voice says, "That shirt looks great on you." The guy looks around, sees nothing. So he returns to his drink and thinks nothing more of it. But then the voice returns and says, "Hey, you seem like a really cool guy." The guy again looks around, sees nothing, returns to his drink, and wonders he should see a doctor about this, somebody like me. Finally, when his nerves have cooled and he believes that the voice is gone, he hears, "I bet your parents are really proud of you. You seem like you're doing a great job with your life." He puts his drink down and looks wildly around, finding no possible source of the voice. Frustrated, and actually really a little bit more worried than frustrated, he calls the bartender over and says, "Hey, bartender, what's this voice I keep hearing?" And the bartender replies, "Oh, those are the peanuts. They're complimentary." So now if you did not, or even if you did, roll your eyes at my corny joke and give a little bit of a laugh, I'd like you to take your pen or your pencil, please clean it off, put it between your teeth, and bite down. Great. Now you're smiling. Smiling triggers positive memories. So humor is really a good medicine. So welcome back for our next 15-minute session. We're going to focus on the connection between our mind and our emotions. And we're going to look to create a safe mental space. And that will happen within our mind and our body because they're connected. We are going to begin with a little bit of stretching because we have been sitting for a while. So if you would like to get up out of your seat, that's great. If you're like, hey, no, this woman's a little nuts and I'm not getting out of my seat, that's totally okay too. Okay, so here's what we're going to do. First, we're going to start with a little bit of a neck roll. As we are by the computer a lot, what we have a tendency to do is crane our neck forward, which actually creates tension here and can also increase our tension headaches, which are usually headaches around this area of your neck. So we're going to roll back and forth a little. We're also going to now do some shoulder shrugs. So up, you can go back and down if you want to do shoulder rolls. You can also just go up and down. Going up creates a tension within our bodies. Going back down actually does realign our shoulders. In the back gives us more breathing room here, but also is a little bit of a meditation and a way to actually do some progressive muscle relaxation. Okay, the last thing that we're gonna do one more thing, and then we're actually gonna work on our hip flexors a little, because as we sit for a long time, especially if you're sitting more at a 90-degree angle, your hip flexors get really tight. But before we do that, we're gonna finish on our upper part of our body, and then we'll move down to our hip flexors. So upper part of our body, what I would like you to do is put your arms up like you do in yoga. If you take yoga, like a sun salutation, and think of something that you're grateful for and bring it to your heart. Think of something in the universe again that you are grateful for and bring it to your heart. One more time. And bring it to your heart. Use my phone, that's work. Okay, now we're gonna work on our hip flexors. This you may need to stand up for because we're actually gonna go to a wall. So what I would like you to do, and I'm going to show you what I can. My wall is here. Sorry, let me go back here. Okay. Sorry guys, I don't know how to get my background off. So what we're basically going to do is we're going to take one of our legs and we're just going to put one of our feet closer to the wall, one of our legs bent like this, so close to the wall. And then we're just going to push. You're going to be on your tiptoes a little bit, and then you're just going to push down and lean. So now instead of this look, we have this look. And we're going to hold it just for a little bit. And we're going to try to have the cat not take us off of the video. Okay, now we're going to switch legs. Now we're going to put our wall or our chair. A chair is a really great thing to use here. We're actually going to go into a high lunge. So let's put our left foot kind of by our chair, and let's actually take our right foot and actually go back into a lunge. Now, if you want a little bit more, and you want to actually work into not just this part where hip flexors are, but a little bit more into your IT band right here, Put your arm up. And so you look like this. And bend over to your left. And you should actually feel that all the way in your hip flexor and then also at the outside of your hip. Okay. And we're going to now switch legs. Again, if you want a little bit more, and it's good to be up on your toes on this, you'll really get a better stretch. But if you do want more, then put your arm up again to your left arm to the right and stretch over and side bend. Okay, this is actually something that you can do while you're in meetings, really to kind of get your hips a little bit more open. And that actually then also avoids some, not just hip pain, but also some lower back pain because you're opening up a joint right behind you as well. Okay. So now that we're kind of stretched out, we've kind of activated our body a little bit, we're going to talk about something called bilateral stimulation. So what this is using these movements, so either tactile movements, so touch, or actually just energetic movements. And the idea is that it actually is supposed to increase the brain connectivity. So, you know, you have two hemispheres in your brain. This actually supposed to connect them a little bit more. Crossing kind of that midline area. So like this, or even just tapping bilaterally. That actually increases our energy. It also increases our connection to our body and makes us calmer. These are very similar techniques to what is used in EMDR, which is, you know, specifically for trauma. And what EMDR does is it's based this idea of alternating, crossing the midline, and then creating a safe physical place and a safe mental place to be able to return to. And we're going to do some of these things. We're going to practice doing this. Now, the exact mechanism is really unknown. They're still studying this. All we know is that it works. We don't exactly know how. And you know what? It's sometimes okay not to know. But it does work and it's not dangerous. So what we're going to do is we're going to actually kind of practice. I'm going to give you some alternatives for bilateral stimulation and for crossing the midline. The first one is actually something that I teach a lot of kids, and little kids love this because it involves tapping. We call it gorilla tapping. So we want to calm that angry gorilla and tapping like this on your chest. So practice that, see how that feels for you. Some people are okay with it. Some people are like, not my thing. The other way to do this is to tap on your forehead. Again, some people are like, okay, this works. Some people are like, not my thing. Okay. The other one is to tap on your thighs. The adolescents that I work with like this one a lot because you can't really see what you're doing. And so it's a nice way to kind of hide some of your distress. So kind of see which one you liked. Okay. The other thing we're going to do is going to be the bilateral arm movement. Again, see which one you like. Okay. So you can do this. You can also do this. I love this one. I think it's just, I feel like you're swimming or something. You can also add your legs and you can move your legs and really get into it like a little dance. If you're doing this, you can also think about things that are stressing you out and actually just feel like you are wiping them away. I do this a lot when I'm talking to people who are stressing me out over the phone. And it's really great. I do this at my staff meetings when I lead them. I see everybody's really stressed out. My staff is fine with doing that. thought I was a little crazy at first, but they're like, wow, that feels so great. And then the last thing that you can do is just a self-hug. You can squeeze. You can also alternate which way you're going to do that. I would say do this in a way, though, that you feel like it's more natural. Sometimes if you're trying to alternate which way you do it, it may not feel as natural. And you concentrate more on the awkwardness of the cross versus actually how you're going to feel. Okay. So right now, what I would like you to do is kind of think about that. Think which one spoke to you. Pick one. Doesn't mean you have to stick to that. Just pick one. Okay. And what I want you to do is I want you to imagine a really safe place. It can be physical. It could be made up. It could be with somebody. It could be out in nature. It could be in a house. It could be anywhere. So just think about that for a second. If you were at the conference last year, I did this part last year, but I think it's always worth it to do again. So we're going to actually practice a little bit of that, not EMDR, because we're not going to use our eyes. We're actually going to use our whole body. So what we're going to do, first, we're going to give ourselves a hug. So just give yourself a hug. Second thing we're going to do is we're going to open our arms. Open them as wide as you want. If you just want it like this, fine. If you want to really stretch out, that's good too. So as you begin doing this, think about that spot. I am safe. I'm strong. I am safe. I'm strong. I am safe. I'm strong. Now go back to your place. You can do this. You can do this. You can do this. You could do the thighs. You can do the arm wave. I'm going to give you 30 seconds to think about your place and do your bilateral stimulation. And I won't look at you, I promise. So think of your place. Savor that place. Savor that freedom of being safe. How that makes you feel. You can close your eyes if you want to. You can fix your eyes in one place. Do the bilateral stimulation. Okay, let's have everybody come back. So thank you guys.
Thank you again, Kiyomi. That was amazing. That spotlight. Awesome. And as we're nearing the end of our conference, I've just shared our evaluation form in the chat. So please take a moment to fill that out today. Your feedback helps us create conferences like this and even better ones. So thanks for doing that. Next up is a panel presentation on loneliness and avoiding a pathway to human trafficking with Nancy Goldberg, SFCAHT co-founder, and Mary Tam, SFCAHT planning committee member. Nancy and Mary, passing everyone to you.
Hey, Nancy, are you with us? I think you might be on mute.
I was on mute. Hello, everyone. Are we ready to start then?
Yep. And Nancy, you're gonna pass to me, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Welcome, everybody. And I just want to say it's been quite a day. And I really thought I knew so much about anti-human trafficking, which I've been involved in for so many years. And I keep learning so much more. So thank you, everyone, today. Recently, a young person came up to me and said she had been considering suicide last year during the COVID shutdown. She told me she was so lonely and felt that she had no friends. Young people, especially, are facing a very lonely and vulnerable time that we don't often hear about. This pandemic has impacted the world that young people are growing up in, from school closures to remote learning, fewer friendships, and more time alone at home, unsupervised on the internet. These are just a few things. This pandemic has disrupted families economically and has impacted the dynamics of human trafficking around the world, turning it into a humanitarian epidemic. The aloneness is what has led us here to this panel today. Our panelists today, who will introduce themselves in a moment, are Dr. Dan Alterman, clinical psychologist, Carly Devlin, Huckleberry House Youth Services, Dr. Gina Castro Rodriguez, a U.S. professor and psychologist, Katie Koifman, Partners and Advocates for Remarkable Children and Adults. I now want to introduce you to three people who've been an important part of today's panel. Thank you to Naz Ryden-Foster from the San Francisco Department on the Status of Women and part of our SFCAHT organizing team. Also, another SFCAHT organizer, Kiyomi Khan Amerik's child and adolescent psychiatrist at Kaiser Medical Center in San Francisco, who will share a few comments on the mental health crisis, loneliness, isolation, and COVID in our vulnerable youth. After Kiyomi says a few words, she will turn over the panel to my co-chair and moderator, Mary Tam, founder of the Nahopena Consulting to acknowledge Native American Day. Mary will then introduce and moderate today's panel. Thank you. Mary, I'll turn it over to you.
No, me first.
Yes, you first. And then you do it after.
And then I'll
Yes,
turn
you
it
first.
over.
I meant you first. God, I would hate to have you not first.
So, Nancy's right. The pandemic has greatly interfered with a lot of processes and definitely has interfered with the child's psychological development. Pediatric mental illness was actually already on the rise before the pandemic. However, social isolation and school closures caused by the need to shelter in place really caused a pediatric mental illness surge, and presently it is at crisis levels. According to JAMA, Journal of American Medicine, and the CDC, emergency room visits for mental health illness increased between mid-March and October 2020 by 24% for school-aged children and 31% for our preteens and adolescents, and that's compared to the 2019 numbers. Despite telehealth services, the mental health system cannot keep up with this surge, and there are simply just not enough child therapists and child psychiatrists to treat the present 3 million children and adolescents with mental illness. The LGBTQ and children of color populations are especially impacted by the lack of mental health services. So the isolation and loneliness felt by children and their caretakers is taking a toll on the mental health of our children and adolescents. And by learning about how loneliness impacts everyone, we can help support our mental health system as well as our communities. Now turning over to Mary.
Thanks so much for that, Nancy and Kiyomi. And as Judge Brial and Benita mentioned earlier in the program, today is California Indian Day and Native American Day. And I wanted to return to Nola's comments about cultural oppression and historical trauma and just how important it is to remember the lasting impacts of our history are still affecting populations today. We were also really fortunate to have Carrie Herthel join us this morning to share her prayer and want to acknowledge not only the harm done, but also the resilience and vibrance of Native peoples who continue to be stewards of their ancestral homelands and of their communities. And on that note, organizers had hoped to have someone join us for this session to address how loneliness and isolation affect Indigenous populations. But we also recognize that many Native organizations are observing today in their own way, and we of course want to be respectful of that. So we're very excited about the panel of experts that we do have with us today. In terms of session flow, we'll be starting by giving the panelists a chance to introduce themselves. And after that, we'll kick things off with a few specific questions directed to speakers. Then we'll open up the floor for speakers to share their thoughts and just kind of have a bit more of a dialogue on broader questions. We've got a wealth of knowledge on this panel, and there's so much that we want to cover in a very short amount of time. So we certainly don't want to disrupt the panel with time cards, but are grateful that our speakers have agreed to be conscious of time to ensure that we get to hear from everyone. And if you have questions along the way, please do feel free to share them in the chat, because we'll conclude the panel with questions from the audience. So with that, I'd like to invite each speaker to introduce themselves and just share a bit about their organizations and their roles in this work. Why don't we go ahead and start with Dr. Gina Castro-Rodriguez.
Good afternoon, everyone. Excited to be here and talk with you all today about this important topic. I am a clinical psychologist and professor at the University of San Francisco, University of San Francisco. I'm also the director of the Survivor Policy Resource and Training Center for the Prosecutors Alliance of California. And I have a small private practice in San Francisco where I see patients mostly who have experienced trauma and violence in their past. I was the former chief of victim services for the San Francisco District Attorney's Office, just left a few months ago to begin this new work.
Thank you so much, Dr. Rodriguez. Carly Devlin, do you want to hop in?
Yes. Hi, y'all. It's so great to be here. My name is Carly Devlin, and I'm the program director of HEART with Huckleberry Programs. We provide services, direct practice, advocacy, and crisis response to young people ages 12 to 24 who are experiencing commercial sexual exploitation or who are vulnerable at risk. And we work very closely with the foster care system, and we'll get into that in a little bit too, I'm sure. Just around policies and procedures and just how our services parallel their response as well. And also knowing that young people who experience exploitation very often have touch points with the child welfare system. It's a strong collaboration and very relevant, specific to this group of young people we are working with. Thank you.
Great. Next, we'll go to Dr. Daniel Alterman.
Hello, everyone. My name is Daniel Alterman. I am a pediatric neuropsychologist and a clinical child, adolescent, and family psychologist. This is what I've been doing for the last 40 years, worked in several continents. In here, been a adjunct lecturer at the Wright Institute, and for 20 years, I was the Division Chief for Child, Adolescent, and Family Psychiatry at Kaiser Permanente Richmond, and presently enjoying the quiet of my own private practice. So that's what I am, and that's what I do. Very glad that you invited me. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you. And last but certainly not least, we're flipping the script a little bit, and we'll have Katie Koifman introduce yourself as a speaker this time.
Yeah, you got me everywhere. I'm really humbled to be here. My name is Katie Koifman. I run operations at PARCA, manage our communications, community engagement, advocacy, development, and the goals of inclusion and accessibility for people with developmental disabilities so they can thrive in community. PARCA is a nonprofit service provider. We've been around for 70 years, and we serve people with developmental disabilities and their families. 1 in 6 children in the US have one or more disabilities. So that gives you kind of a broad picture of how many people we serve and how many people need our services. We provide support from the time parents know they'll have a child with a disability throughout all their stages in their life, through affordable and accessible housing, skills building, life coaching, healthcare, before and after school childcare, education support, family support, advocacy, and supporting them with resources for food access, employment, transportation. It's like we're creating an extended family where each client knows they'll be safe, that included, they have a community, and their caregivers have the resources for them to be effective and resilient. And folks with disabilities are especially at risk for exploitation and human trafficking. We focus mostly on prevention and education for our clients and staff and their caregivers.
Wonderful. Thank you all for sharing your backgrounds and also for being with us here today. It's really fantastic to have folks who can speak to how issues of loneliness affect different populations and groups. And so we're really excited to learn from all of you. Our first question goes to Dr. Alterman, and it would be wonderful if you could kick us off by just kind of setting the stage. Could you share a bit about the psychological path that children experience between birth or early childhood and exploitation?
Yeah, I mean, obviously a very wide subject, and and thank you for the opportunity to talk about part of this subject. I will begin with a brief disclaimer and disclosure. I'm giving you a summary of a summary of a summary of part of my lectures. So I just hope to be able to give you a taste on how compelling the issue is, and everything begins at home. And also, when you end up in the streets and you are a victim of trafficking, it began at home. It began from birth at home. So, the issue of what makes a minor or a young adult prone to be the victim of trafficking is complex. It's accounted by multiple factors, all of them extremely important. And I want to call your attention to one factor. And for the most part, is overlooked and underrated, in spite of it affecting what I believe to be maybe 20% of the population of children and adolescents. The factor I want to discuss is parenting, but specifically the ability of parents to accommodate their children's specific temperament and structure, right? To accommodate to their children's specific temperament. And here is a story. About 20% of babies are born with what I call a strong-willed temperament. And that temperament includes poor impulse control, low frustration tolerance, high needs for stimulation, and emotional hypersensitivity. Now, these kids, these 20% of kids, millions of them in the United States, are not emotionally disturbed. We are talking about a congenitally given temperament, which is as good as any other. I mean, we are learned with the years to appreciate diversity, and we have to learn to appreciate diversity of temperaments. And if this temperament is as good as any other, provided that is handled properly by the parents. So conventional, or let's say intuitive parenting techniques that we all have are generally good enough for 80% of temperaments. However, and unfortunately, they fail almost with no exception with 20% of children with the kind of temperament that I described above. So again, notice that we're talking about millions of children, huge population. Now, when conventional parenting fails, parents turn into increased intensity parenting. This happens with no exception. And that increased intensity parenting includes often shouting at the child, often uttering diminishing remarks towards the child, which with repetition become quite traumatic when the parents are uttering diminishing statements to the child. Pathologizing, like even the simple, what's wrong with you? What is in your mind that you cannot understand? When that is repeated, as it is in this case. So that's high intensity parenting. It often includes corporal punishment that is as good for mental health as cigarettes are for lung cancer. So generally in these cases, also parents exhibit mega dosages of intensely expressed negative emotions. Now this is a psychopathogenic slippery slope. The more the parents use these techniques, the more wounded and difficult the child becomes. The more difficult the child becomes, the more the parents increase the intensity, and so on. And it's a slippery slope. So no wonder, this is my experience, but a lot of research also, that by age 5, most of these children already exhibit symptoms of depression, anxiety, and defiant behaviors. And unfortunately, the defiant behaviors mask the depression and the anxiety, and the focus, again, is on shouting at these kids and tell them using high-intensity parenting as a solution to the problem. Soon enough, these children experience of themselves in the world is encompassed by feelings of being undeserving of love, of being hated and abandoned by the parents, of being different and inferior to their peers, and of being bad and unproductive, and the list goes on. Under these circumstances, these children are more prone to engage in negative social associations, drug use, gang activities, delinquent activities, joining to the little group in the classroom, even in elementary school, cut classes, and soon enough, cut classes to use marijuana and steal something from the liquor store. They do, and they do so, they join gangs later, they engage in delinquent activities. They do so in order to get a sense of self-value and a sense of belonging, which, if you think, is the opposite of loneliness and solitude. And remember that loneliness and solitude is a psychological state, it's not a real. I've seen many kids that are surrounded by loving people and they feel lonely and feel solitary. So at this point, they are the easiest target for these psychopathic criminals who engage in human trafficking. We are talking about a huge population. So my point sounds tragic because this dialectic between parenting and difficult temperament produce this slippery slope. But my point is not tragic. In fact, it's very hopeful. We can save many children from a feeling of abandonment and loneliness, from becoming the victim of trafficking, and from increased incidence of mental disorders by enabling the parents to properly parent children who belong to this 20% at-risk population. I've done it for the last 40 years. That brought a lot of satisfaction to my professional life.
Thank you so much.
Very well.
Yeah, it's really helpful context to have as we delve into this topic, and also echoes, comments we've heard today about youth, in search of love and belonging. Carly, I understand that Huckleberry works with youth that have experienced commercial sexual exploitation and or have been involved in the foster care system, and would love to hear, how do you see loneliness and isolation as contributing factors to human trafficking? And how has this past kind of pandemic year affected the youth that you work with at Huckleberry?
Definitely, thank you. So when I'm thinking about this issue of loneliness, I often think about it in the context of human trafficking as connectedness, actually, that the experience of loneliness and isolation, the flip side of that is connectedness, and that for young people who are experiencing exploitation, that there's a lack of that connectedness, not only to other people, potentially caregivers, peers. We see a lot of peer conflict occurring among some of the youth we work with too, and also access to resources too, and access to community. So when I think about isolation and loneliness, there is this psychological dynamic of it. And I also see it from the perspective of connection to resources, systems, networks, social ecosystems. So that I think, and just in terms of framing the issue too, I often think about that the basics are that needs and survival needs and emotional survival needs are driven by marginalization, and those needs are tapped into and taken advantage of either by a trafficker or exploiter or by the survival needs the young person has. So I do want to say all these things are very related in terms of connectedness, isolation, loneliness, and also the larger systems level factors as they relate to this as well. And when we think, and particularly within the foster care system, because we work so closely with young people who have touch points with that system, we see dislocated relationships really emerge either due to prior traumas that led a young person to have a touch point with the child welfare system, or the child welfare system itself may sometimes exacerbate some pre-existing vulnerabilities that a young person has. And this is really due to an overall systems level and the system as it fits into our larger society too. So marginalization is not just enforced by systems, but it's enforced by forms of oppression, racism, sexism, misogyny, thinking about folks who don't have access to resources due to immigration status. So I do want to point out that all those factors are present too, as far as driving marginalization and driving those needs as well. So there are a lot of psychological dynamics that I do want to highlight with this as well, just knowing that, and this is when I do presentations and trainings on this, this is sort of one of the more uncomfortable things we talk about, which is just that experiencing exploitation is sort of filling a need in some way. There's a psychological need a young person has, and someone is taking advantage of that and filling that need, which is an uncomfortable dynamic that we have a world in which exploitation and this power and control can take place and fill a need for a young person. But the fact that that dynamic exists and that we recognize the real underlying psychological needs behind this, I think are really key in terms of thinking about this issue and young people's experiences in general. And in the last year, what we have seen is definitely the isolation in terms of isolation from other peers, being physically isolated, but a lot of the youth we work with in the foster care system are not necessarily stuck at home. They may be experiencing homelessness. So it's a different type of isolation there. And young people have been, and another thing I want to point out too is that before the pandemic, young people were still in vulnerable situations. And I know there's been a lot of interest in how the pandemic has impacted isolation and young people. And when I frame this as well, what I say is that the pandemic exacerbated pre-existing vulnerabilities, and these vulnerabilities will be here once the pandemic is wrapped up, whatever that looks like. So really to focus on those core issues and vulnerabilities, I think is really key. And just thinking about the work we've seen with youth who are experiencing homelessness as well, of just around some of the challenges in the foster care system, just logistically due to COVID, was that it became harder for young people to re-enter placements due to quarantine. And this is a very specific example, but that placements in families and foster homes, some had more stringent requirements on quarantining, or if a young person leaves, which very frequently happens, and comes back, there may be challenges in what happened if this young person was exposed while they were out and about and not in this home or placement. So there were some challenges there. And that's just an example of the isolation in terms of like access to resources. And not a thing that any of us could have predicted. And there are definitely reasons why those regulations and standards existed as far as keeping folks safe, but just knowing that there was a ripple effect on young people in the foster care system's ability to access some of these placements, particularly residential placements in congregate care facilities as well. And I also want to do and think through as well connection to community, and that there's isolation that can happen when young people are in placements in the foster care system that aren't close to their community. And I just want to highlight that connection to community is such a key element of young people's lives, and that their community may be, I'm sorry, it's a little loud where I am, so I'll do this. Is this better? Okay.
That's great, thank you.
It looks weird, but here we are. But there is this element of young people often leave placements in the foster care system if they're out of the area because of the connection to community. And maybe an exploiter, a trafficker saying, this is taking them back from that placement. And it also may be that this is where a young person's community is. This is where their friends are. They may have been removed from parents, but their parents are also where they feel most connected and want to be. So I do think that the one way that isolation and loneliness is an important way to think about it, and that the reframe can very much be, how do we facilitate connectedness in all of these different ways. So to other people, to basic needs, to resources, to peers, to activities that make a young person feel whole. I think that if the frame of connectedness can be very important.
Great. Thank you so much, Carly. Lots of great points. Our youth are facing so many challenges, and I really particularly appreciate your comments around survival needs and social ecosystems. Carly also mentioned, the number of youth experiencing homelessness, and I want to turn now to Dr. Rodriguez. We know that a vulnerable subgroup of the houseless and homeless population identify as LGBTQIA. How does loneliness and isolation affect this group, and to what degree does it result in human trafficking?
Well, thank you. Happy to talk about loneliness because it's a really big issue that we don't give a lot of space to, we don't give a lot of highlight to and really pay attention to. But loneliness actually can cause poor physical health, it can cause poor mental health, and definitely poor social health. So we want to focus on it and be aware. Young people really need many things, but there's 4 things that we're really looking for in the mental health world. We're looking for the quality and the quantity of their family support, their connection to people, particularly to their peers and other healthy relationships. We're looking for their experience of acceptance while they are defining who they are and figuring out how they walk around in the world, and that they have some meaningful participation in creating or contributing to their environment, something that helps build their competency and helps them shape the world around them. Unfortunately, we have a lot of young people in the population we're talking about today that are experiencing some really significant barriers to those healthy aspects that we're looking for. Loneliness is definitely one of them. And some of the causes of that are isolation, disconnection, in their family, in their peer group, in their community. But also there's another layer for LGBTQAI youth, which is rejection, marginalization, discrimination, and alienation, sometimes even in their own homes. And so we have to understand the magnitude of the impact of something like that for young people who are looking to find their connection and to be around other people and to be accepted and to be part of a group. Those things have a really big impact. And so, the biggest risks are things like depression and anxiety that the other speakers have spoken about today. But there's some additional social risks that we need to pay attention to. Things like risky sexual behavior, risk of STDs and HIV, risk of self-harm or suicidal behavior, substance abuse, and then of course, homelessness and exploitation. Whenever a young person is not in a home where they are safe, protected, and taken care of, they don't have opportunities to do what they're supposed to do during this time period, which is to express their autonomy, try things out, make mistakes, recover from those mistakes, and try again. That's really the fundamental goal of adolescence. Make a mistake, try again, and learn how to become who we're going to be as adults. And the more risky or unsafe the environment is, the less opportunity they have to do that in a safe way. And it prevents them from reaching their developmental milestones and sort of growing up in a way that allows them to have a good foundation for becoming adults. So what we want is a young person to grow up with some structure, some boundaries, some safety, as well as practicing some autonomy and gaining responsibility and figuring out who they are, and that those 2 things together will help build well-being and good self-esteem and good self-acceptance, good self-worth, good value. But when they don't have those things, we get young people that end up having to operate in a crisis mode, figuring out how to get from day to day, figuring out how to reduce harm to themselves, figuring out how to soothe the emotional responses that they have to the things that we talked about with loneliness and isolation. The good news is that there are resources. There are things that I connect clients with all the time. One is a 24-hour resource online that I'll put in the chat called the Trevor Project. The Trevor Project has a website that has networking spaces for young people to connect and to hang out in. It has a 24-hour crisis phone line that young people could call. It has a 24-hour text line that a young person can text. And it has a 24-hour website that you can get information on. And the good news is that there's several studies out now that say that parasocial relationships, which are sort of a one-sided relationship, like it could be contacting a website like this or a resource like this, or it could be watching people that you look up to on YouTube or on the internet, that those relationships actually do foster connectiveness, even though they are not the traditional kind of relationships that we see or want for young people, and that there's a lot of value in them, particularly for young people that are isolated and lonely. And so when we build out resources like this for young people, we are building lifelines for them, where they can access peer support, where they can access other people that look, sound, and feel like them, and where they can ask questions that they're not allowed to ask in other spaces that would contribute to that rejection or that marginalization. So these things are really vital for young people. It's important for us to have them available. And I will put those in the chat.
Thank you so much, Dr. Castro Rodriguez. It's so important to remember that folks are often operating in crisis mode, and to think about that as we're trying to build out the lifelines that you were talking about. On the subject of vulnerability, we've seen that youth with disabilities can also be extremely vulnerable to human trafficking. Katie, could you speak to how loneliness and isolation play a role in the experience of youth with disabilities and how that relates to human trafficking?
Definitely. And I'll probably be echoing a lot of what's been said, because it turns out our work is very similar. So children with disabilities are at least 3 times more likely to be abused or neglected over their peers without disabilities. And with the pandemic, we've really seen high rates of anxiety and depression due to isolation. Most of clients' lives were really put on pause, and especially those with health risks. They're used to being more independent, having their routines, and everything was just kind of stopped. And so we found that like individuals with disabilities, especially youth, they've been seeking, craving connection. They want friendship, inclusion, belonging, love, acceptance, all the things that Nola was talking about earlier today. These desires are really easily exploited, especially in times of isolation and on social media. Folks in our population are typically socialized in a climate that they're othered, they're treated as less valuable, discriminated against, alienated. That truth is often key to exploitation because it saves traffickers some work. They can be trafficked for sex, labor, especially they're vulnerable to financial exploitation like theft of Social Security and disability benefits. Oftentimes they don't realize they're being exploited. Folks with disabilities may need a caregiver, and that dependency can be exploited since they've learned to comply to all the requests due to that dependence, whether that's their caregiver or another authority figure. And that power dynamic makes them especially vulnerable and exacerbates the feeling of powerlessness. If they have communication differences, then they might struggle to report abuse and to understand that it's not their fault. They may not be aware of their rights, that they can say no, or that they're victims. Guilt and shame are driving factors in keeping folks from speaking up, and that's true across the board. That's why education on autonomy is so important, and we really focus on that. The isolation and loneliness have just exacerbated the possibility for these situations, and they were definitely there before the pandemic, but we were really seeing them be exacerbated. Through our programs, we do one-on-one and group settings. We seek to address these issues and create a sense of belonging and build supports. We do that through continuity of care to ensure stability, through connection to build trust, and community for that belonging. People with disabilities are disproportionately vulnerable to those physical, mental, social effects of the pandemic. Many need in-person care or therapeutic support within their home. The structures and supports that agencies like ours built over time for each client and had like a strong backbone to support them and cheer them on, they shifted virtual overnight. So even though we had a goal of no interruption of care, those screen-based technology that we used to bridge the gap wasn't always the best option. With vaccines, proper safety measures, we're able to provide safe in-person care, but the isolation in between that, where clients really regressed into poor habits, didn't exercise, eat right, talk to others, And that's where that depression and anxiety really skyrockets. So we've had a strong focus on building coping skills, learning how to use technology like Zoom safely, connecting online safely, and sticking with healthy habits. With online learning, even more youth have kind of dove into the online world, and they've been inexperienced with it. And they've had access to social media without much education on the dangers there. With the lack of socialization and being at home and not in school, we've seen kids' social skills deteriorate in our programs. They don't recognize social cues. They don't feel confident. And our before and after school program for children with and without disabilities, it shifted to reduced capacity because of COVID. And we transformed it to an in-person distance learning support. Because with virtual learning, there was such a strong disparity in the delivery of a free and appropriate public education for students needing a special education. You know, everyone learns differently, and that's really difficult to deliver virtually well. And that can be frustrating for children, for their parents, for their teachers, and it makes them feel neglected and alone. When I talk about youth in the context of my work, I'm talking about the grade school kids, but I'm also talking about folks up into their 20s. Typically, if youth are finishing special education in school, they can do so up to like age 22. And they're in this period of transition then, where they might struggle to find work or be placed in a day program. And each person's abilities and needs are different, and there's not always a place for them, or at least one that they're aware of. So these youth are especially vulnerable because of the lack of job prospects, the gap between their skills and their goals, and really the gap in services relevant to them and that they can access. So really this year, and this has been a kind of a main focus, we've really been trying to do more strategic meetings with each client to gauge where they're at, how they're feeling, what they're dealing with, listening, making sure that they know that they're being heard, and acting on that, ensuring that they know they have the authority over themselves, and that we can work together to make things better, that their life is going to get better, even though we're in this tough time, and doing our best to ensure that they don't feel that powerlessness, but instead feel empowered. Overall, the loneliness and isolation are really just exacerbating the vulnerabilities that exist and underscoring the need for more services and a collaborative approach to prevent abuse and exploitation. It's really on us to keep them safe.
Thank you so much, Katie. It really does underscore the need to protect our most vulnerable youth, as well as helping them build coping skills, social skills, and really looking to empower folks for the strength that they do have inside. And I'm so glad that we had a chance to start off with specific questions for each of our panelists. Now I'd like to transition to a little bit more of an open forum. So we've heard a bit about the challenges faced by various groups, and now we'd like to turn our attention to the more positive side and the solutions-oriented side. The first question that I have for all of you is, what type of work that you or your organization are doing to help prevent those who are lonely and isolated from being trafficked? I know some of you started to touch on that, but would love to hear expansions upon that. And of course, anything you're doing to support survivors is a relevant part of that conversation. So just want to invite our panelists to feel free to kind of jump in with your thoughts. I know it's a virtual environment, so we might have moments where we talk over each other, but I'm sure we'll figure it out. Anyone want to jump in?
I could start. When I'm working with young people one-on-one in my private practice, what I'm doing is trying to understand what are their resources, who do they have connection to currently, and we try to build on that. How can you maximize those relationships that you have? And where there are deficits in those relationships, then we're looking for organizations, opportunities for them to meet other people. And so I might connect them to a support group, or try to connect them to a club at their school, or get them interested in something that they already want to build connection with, and then help remove any barriers that are there. And there's a lot of barriers. It could be financial. It could be just getting some support and some guidance and contacting a resource and making that connection. So talking about what is in the way, and then helping them access those things. Also helping them explore things that are interesting to them. You know, young people unfortunately don't have people in their lives that can spend a lot of time with them and get excited about the things that they're excited about, and help them understand what's the process for setting a goal, or reaching out and exploring something that is interesting to them. And so those kinds of conversations are really valuable.
Yeah, thank you, Gina. I would very much echo what you said about building on young people's strengths and the connections they already have. And just thinking through what are different opportunities, whether it be like internships or volunteering or like you're saying, peer support groups or community building circles. Think through what are those opportunities for young people to connect with their peers, to connect with adults. I also want to say too, just that the range of experiences that young people who experience exploitation have are very, there's a very broad range of those. We work with some young people who are in and out of juvenile hall and the psychiatric hospital and experiencing homelessness in some very traumatic situations. And we also work with youth who are living at home and are attending online school and maybe having challenges with safety on the internet. But there's a really large range. And I think that something we can think about is just how to meet the needs given sort of specifically where some of these young people are, keeping the frame of connectedness and isolation and loneliness there. For example, if a young person may be detained in juvenile hall, how can we ensure that they still have connections with caregivers in their lives? So maybe a young person has a caregiver who is kind of tangentially involved, but might not know how to call them or connect with them in juvenile hall. Visiting shifted for a while. So what does it mean to like build up those connections with youth, even when they are in these crisis-oriented situations? And also having a short and long-term plan, I think, is really important. Sometimes I think folks doing this work, myself included, can get caught up in what's the short-term plan. It's an emergency, it's a crisis. But then sometimes we can get caught up in what's the long-term plan and forget the immediate needs. So really being able to hold both of those things is really key, and be able to weave them together. And how do we, if a young person is experiencing homelessness, what is the emergency and crisis and what are their basic needs, and how do we support them in increasing their connection if they're living on the streets? And then if a young person is in a home, how can we support the relationships within the home? And sometimes that's therapy, family therapy. Sometimes that's attending a virtual or in-person drop-in center. There's a lot of opportunities for young people to plug in. And I just want to highlight that tailoring it to what young people are presenting and their specific experience is really important in doing this work. Also knowing that there's such a wide range, and also that there are so many public systems that young people have touch points with. Some have none, but some have a lot. And I also want to just mention the harm reduction perspective in terms of doing this work too, and knowing that a young person may not go 0 to 60 from an unsafe to a safe situation. And how do we even define those things too? It can be very subjective. But what does an in-between look like? And what is the short-term plan, the long-term plan? How do we support youth in reaching safer environments and not necessarily safe right away, and have that safe be the goal, but also know that it may be there's a short-term and a long-term goal for young people in terms of what kind of stabilization can look like, especially because young people often don't have control in lots of ways, especially if they're minors and they're in this place where there's an expectation that they can negotiate the world on their own, but then there's also the expectation that they can't make certain decisions because they're minors. So I think it's just holding the autonomy and agency and finding places for that where we can find it for young people.
You know, if I may, I would like to say a few words about early intervention, because it's usually neglected. The 5-year-olds, 7-year-olds, they don't enter the kind of crisis that the whole system comes to their help. They're not a squeaky wheel, so they don't get a lot of grease. However, I think that there are big advantages. You know, since I work for many years, I hear that there are not enough resources in mental health. For 40 years, I see that getting worse and worse. So I don't think that in the next 10 years, we are going to have a lot more resources. So to be able to have the parents as a mental health resource is fantastic, in particular that they can help young people. An example of existing things you know, for many years, I ran in Kaiser Permanente a program called the Parent Workshop. And parents will come like 6 times and get lectures. It's an art to convince the parents imparting knowledge is not enough, but we work very hard at Kaiser I know it continues. I know other Kaisers have that resource. In Richmond, that resource, because I saw the potential prevention on it, I managed to open it for the whole community, not only for Kaiser patients. I am sure it's still so. I even presented in schools in the area, so teachers feel comfortable to tell the parents, your kid is difficult, go to Kaiser, you don't have to be a member. And I think that as mental health professionals, when we see difficult kids, and we begin noticing that there is a problem, that their temperament is such, not to underestimate, not to wait for a DSM diagnosis such as depression and anxiety or bipolar, and not to underestimate the duty and the capacity of the parents to provide proper parenting. And again, if I can say one thing that I learned from, for sure, in so many years, is that the key to mental health is proper parenting. Even if the kid has the genes for mental disorders, and this can be said across socioeconomic classes and status. But I think that even more for the groups and communities that are more at risk, then more we have to provide the parents with the ability to help. So sorry, I went too long with this subject of parents because I'm kind of passionate about it.
No, absolutely. I feel like each of these subjects, we could all talk all day. Before I move on to the next question, Katie, did you have anything additional you wanted to chime in on?
Yeah, happy to chime in. You know, the work that we do to prevent those who are lonely and isolated from being trafficked, it's mostly focused on, for youth, it's our family support services. We have an entire program just dedicated to helping parents and caregivers basically understand what's going to happen with their kid and how they can support them to be their best advocate and to meet them where they're at. So that's definitely for the children. That's a big area of support. And then where our education comes in is with independent living services, just like one-on-one and group support for clients from counselors to help them develop skills necessary to live independently and be active in their chosen community. So we provide this in all of our programs, including like supportive housing. Counselors kind of operate like a life coach, and they help clients set and reach goals, and they help bring in the caregivers or parents or whoever that support system is for that client to support them in that, so that it is client-centric. It's not just the mom wants you to learn how to cook. It's really focused on the client and having them have that autonomy and agency to decide what their life's going to look like, obviously with some structures in place for that to be reasonable. And in relation to preventing human trafficking, it's really focused on helping clients understand what healthy relationships for themselves and with others look like, how to navigate group dynamics, what behaviors are okay with their inner circle versus their outer circle and strangers, coping skills, like I mentioned before, meditation, and how to identify those red flags of unhealthy relationships. So when they're on social media and some famous person has friended them, they know that it's not real, which is very hard to convince someone. I too want like some famous celebrity to message me and be my friend, right? Sometimes. So it's just a matter of having that education there. We talk about personal safety, setting boundaries and how to speak up for yourself, and advocate when you feel like you need support or something's wrong, so that they know they can go somewhere for help, and that's a safe place where they will be listened to and believed. Again, with more safety shifting online, we help folks understand what's going on with that social media and really help them understand that the bonds that they're creating and the connections that they're creating can be exploited, but we still want them to, be social. And so providing that education on what information and pictures you should and shouldn't share online, as well as helping them understand their rights, educate them and their caregivers on what their legal rights are, that they're entitled to a public education, that their have a right to be paid for their work, safe housing, benefits, services, they're all entitled to that. So making sure that all that information is also geared in a way that's appropriate for each client and they're accessible to their learning needs. And just building those strong relationships of trust between clients and staff, since most of our clients are long-term clients and we support them throughout their life, we're able to do that. And that's really integral to addressing problematic situations before they escalate.
Thanks so much. Thank you all. It's definitely inspiring to hear about the work that's being done and the various approaches that each of you is taking. Riding on the momentum of this discussion, when you think about a larger vision, what are the opportunities to create interventions that would prevent lonely and vulnerable people from going down that pathway to human trafficking? For example, a couple of times barriers have come up today. What are the barriers that need to be removed or addressed? How can we best serve communities holistically, particularly those who are most vulnerable and marginalized? Where is there opportunity for collaboration to improve both direct services, but also change at a systemic level? And there's certainly no single solution, but we'd love to hear your visions for change. And after this, we do have a couple of great questions that have come in from our attendees. So this will be our last group question, and then we'll move over to Q&A. But again, just want to invite our panelists to chime in on the subject matter of the bigger vision.
I think it's really important that we have unstructured things for young people that they can participate in and join. I love the drop-in space idea where young people can access it when they need it, but they're not burdened with an appointment or a certain time that they have to be there or something that they have to attend regularly, because we want them to grow those social connections outside of services too, but we want them to have access to service. So we need things that sort of frame around a young person's life, right? So we need things that are available after school hours until late at night. We need things that are easily accessible. You can just drop in and out and you don't have to make a commitment to it. We need people that work there that understand how young people work and what are the kinds of things that prevent them from accessing things like judgment or too much questioning or too much structure in what they're doing. It has to be developmentally appropriate, and then it has to be interesting. So we need young people to engage in building it and deciding what kinds of things they're interested in and that they would want to engage in. And it needs to have a lot of options too. I mean, we need to have sports and physical activity and academic things and arts and just all the things that we know enrich young people's lives. Sometimes we just have to make it easier for young people to access it in a safe space.
Thanks, Gina. And I also want to just add to the point and riff off your point on supports in young people's lives that are not just service providers, because especially for system involved youth, there can be a lot of different service providers in their lives, whether it be a therapist or a social worker or a probation officer or a whole slew of other providers. And something I think about in doing this work is who in this young person's life is not a mandated reporter in some ways too. Like, who is that natural connection and that's just sort of like a stand-in for like the extent of system involvement, right? Like, it's not that I'm against mandated reporting at all. It's like, who are those natural connections that can really support a young person? Because also in terms of isolation and loneliness, like service providers come and go, and that folks move on from their jobs. They are not designed. A lot of these services aren't designed to be in young people's lives forever, but who are those permanent connections who are? And I also just want to add too, in terms of thinking about systemic marginalization, that I think we need to be holding that in the sort of center of this work too, that how are young people affected by these larger systems of oppression, and how does that play out in program policies and procedures? How does that play out in their ability to access services and how the services are designed? Where might we be doing harm where we don't intend it, and how do we correct and rectify that? And how do we just really truly listen to young people, and that acceptance, that judgment, and also, or lack of judgment, and also knowing that it takes time. These are long processes. It takes time for a young person to build connections and build trust in a service provider, but also in people in their life who may have harmed them, who still wants to be in their life too. So I think there's just a lot of complexity, and I think we have to be patient with the process of change and growth as well.
I'll go off that. I think that for a larger vision, the place where we see like a real opportunity, I think my headphone just died. Can you hear me?
Yeah, you're fine.
Yes, okay, cool. The place where we see a really big opportunity is just like building that strong network of people who support the client. In reality, we all need that, like having the education that's appropriate about what human trafficking is, what healthy and unhealthy relationships look like, along with like facilitated social gatherings. It's really essential to the growth and development of the clients we serve. And one thing that we've seen really works and has been a great intervention for folks who are experiencing anxiety and loneliness and depression has been goal setting and guiding our clients to pursue their passion and find a passion, providing resources for them to be themselves. If they're educated on those red flags and they feel loved, included, supported, safe, and really included, then that's a great step forward to thwarting traffickers. They're whole human beings. They have wants, needs. We need to serve them holistically and build people up to be their best self. And our decisions are really client informed and centered. So we work with them to determine what it is that they want out of their life and help them set those goals. Like someone wanted to learn how to cook shrimp scampi. So we help them cook shrimp scampi and go through the steps of that so that they can set their goals, reach them. One of our clients started an Etsy store. They wanted to learn meditation, how to be a better public speaker. They joined Toastmasters or just making a new friend. And so meeting people where they're at and supporting them to reach those goals has been really key for us. One really cool example has been that a partnership with Renaissance program, where we're putting entrepreneurship classes into all special education classrooms in San Mateo County. And so students will basically learn and grow their passions or ideas with the proper pillars of help in areas that they need them. And they'll be able to create whatever kind of business that they're interested in, if that's their choice. We also partnered with another organization that helped us get new computer and technology for a client who has severe social anxiety, but loves to do video game design. So helping them be themselves where they're at and help them grow within that makes them feel more confident, more secure, and really be part of a community that supports them. That's what I really hope that we can do for everybody, really.
Thanks so much. Final thoughts?
Just to mention very briefly, in addition to agreeing wholeheartedly with the suggestions made right now, I think that the power of group psychotherapy for adolescents in these kind of cases is fabulous. If you think for a moment, it partially solves the problem of resources. You do 8 people in 1 hour rather than 8 hours for 8 people. So it's efficient when we are short of staff, but also it gives that sense of belonging and universality. That you don't get in individual therapy with this. It gives to them that sense of belonging and universality and acceptance under the control of a therapist. Now, the only problem is that adolescents tend to say, I don't want group psychotherapy. And we have to become very good at telling you are going to group psychotherapy is going to be fantastic, but don't argue too much. To find a way, but it's very effective. Just wanted to mention that.
Thank you so much. And thank you all for sharing these visions with us that speak to what is possible. We've only got a couple minutes left, and I do want to make sure we get to at least one of these questions, which is very specific. How do you access the peer support groups? And I think this question came up when Katie was speaking. And if there's a link that folks can actually direct youth to. And so I think that came up when Katie was talking, but certainly if any of other speakers have links or organizations or information that you could drop into the chat and let folks know where they can go also to find peer support groups. That would be extremely helpful. I think with the remaining time, I'll just say thank you so much to our audience and to our panel for offering, such insightful thoughts. I do have to say at times I feel a bit of a sense of despair about the magnitude of sexual exploitation in our world. But it's forums like this that remind me that there's so much meaningful work being done and that there's absolutely hope and that it's really up to all of us to do our part to move the needle in the right direction. And with that, I want to hand it back to Nancy to close out the session.
I want to say thank you to everybody. I mean, the panel, you were all just wonderful and I got so much out of it. I want to say, yes, this is a program entitled It's Everybody's Business. I feel it's also everybody's responsibility. I feel it's my responsibility to try to bring this to a broader community. And I just think that I hate to see this panel abandoned because I think that if this panel were to be in front of a larger group and churches, synagogues, schools all over, I think it could be very, very beneficial. And I thank you all, Mary, Kiyomi, Naz, and Gina and Katie and Carly and Danny. Thank you all so very much. And I wish we could do this conference more than once a year. Now that should make somebody cringe like Katie. So thank you, everybody. Antonia?
Yeah, I'll be getting Antonia on here shortly. Switching hats. Thank you everyone for such a great panel. I'm honored to be on it. As we close the conference, I'd like to thank you all for joining us on this jam-packed Friday. We hope that this meeting has filled your home or office with a lot of information, but also hopefully some inspiration that we can all work on this together. I'd like to invite Emily Marase and Antonia Levine for their closing remarks.
Thank you so much, Katie. You've been an amazing MC today. Today has truly been a gift. I had the chance to see former colleagues who I haven't seen in over a year, including Antonio Flores and Carly Devlin, and to meet many new inspirational advocates. And I hope you feel the same way. An important way to reciprocate this gift is to complete the feedback form. Can I ask someone to put the link in the chat again? Please do let us know if you'd like to serve on next year's conference committee, suggest additional topics, panelists. Please do give us your feedback. But I also ask that you go gentle on the technical issues, which were way beyond the control of conference organizers. They really did their best under the circumstances. So some things are beyond their control. I have the privilege of bringing back our fearless leader, Antonia Levine. Even if you've worked with her closely, you may not know that she was the driving force behind anti-corruption, anti-trafficking efforts in her native Bulgaria and throughout the European Union. She and SFCAHT founder Nancy Goldberg, who you just heard, are the reason why we are here today. Their vision in 2009, when the very first human trafficking conference was convened in San Francisco, is the reason that we are all here together. They have fueled this movement. And I'm very pleased to bring back to you my dear friend, Antonia.
Thank you, Emily, and thank you for your exceptional contribution to the creation of the collaborative. It was like yesterday, but it's been so long. It's been 12 years. I see here Julie Sue, in addition to Nancy, many of the co-founders of the collaborative, of course, serving some of them also as co-chairs of the collaborative. It's been exciting to be together and looking today at this wonderful crowd of devoted advocates and professionals and volunteers working in the field, the survivors, our advisors and leaders of the movement. It's been so rewarding to see the fruit of our hard work all together in a wonderful team. Please join our planning committee for the next annual awareness campaign. We'll start working on that shortly after we give some relief to the group that planned this conference. And at the end, I just want to ask Judge Brew and Benita if they have something. I'm sure you have something to say for goodbye.
I have nothing more to say, Antonia. I think you said it all. Thank you, everyone, for your really meaningful participation in this conference. Thank you to my co-chair, Benita. Thank you to all the participants.
Same here. Another beautiful day. Thank you, one and all.